Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Eddard II. White Harbor was exactly as Ned remembered it. From far off, the city was like white marble, the masts of the ships creating a wood forest, but instead of leaves, there were all colors of sailcloth. As the Fisher King got closer, the whiteness of the city became marred and uneven, as the sea and wind had stripped the building blocks to their original color. Then the smell hit the Lord of Winterfell. Hundreds of unwashed bodies combined with the smell of fish created a very unpleasant smell. "What's that smell?" Arya asked, holding her nose as she walked up to her father. "That's the smell of the sea," Ned laughed. "It'll be over once we move past the harbor." "It's horrible," Arya protested. Ned laughed again. He had many feverish dreams about his daughters, while he had been transported from King's Landing to Davos. Sansa was the perfect lady, just as Catelyn had been when Ned had first met her. But Arya was Lyanna through and through, unapologetically herself. He ruffled his daughter's hair. "How are your lessons going?" When Darren's agents had gone looking for Arya in the city after she had escaped the Red Keep, they had come across Syrio Forel, her dancing master, who had gone looking for her as well. After explaining to Forel who they were and why they were looking for Arya, and finding out who he was and why he was looking for her, they teamed up and found Ned's daughter chasing after a rat. For Arya's safety, she hadn't been told who the agents were, only that they were old friends of House Stark. It was only after Syrio had said that they could be trusted were they able to coax Arya on board the ship, bound for Davos. Arya then spent her entire voyage and her time at Snowfall training with Forel while Ned developed and beat a fever. She now looked like a true bravo with a leather jerkin, knee-high boots, and her hair pulled back in a simple knot that her mother would find unladylike. But she looked extremely happy. Arya proudly showed her father her hands. They were red and raw from climbing the rigging and fencing. "They're going really well," she said happily. Ned smiled. "I'm glad. I don't know how your mother will react, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it." "Will mother still love me?" Arya asked quietly, the happy smile fading. Ned bent over, still unable to kneel because of his knee, and placed his hand on Arya's shoulder, looking her in the eye. "Arya, what you saw in King's Landing with the Lannisters and Robert, that's not family. Jon, Robb, Sansa, Rickon, Bran, your mother and I will always love you. No matter what. Do you understand me?" Arya nodded. Ned smiled, patting her on the shoulder. "When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies. But the pack survives," Arya finished firmly. "Never forget it," Ned said as he turned his gaze back towards the city. Now the first ships of the fleet were making their way into the harbor. Waiting on the docks, decked in silver armor and wielding tridents and shields, were a squad of city guards under the command of a knight wearing ornate and decorative armor. He did not wield a trident, but did have a bejeweled longsword at his side. As the ship came to a stop alongside the dock, the guards turned and stamped their tridents on the dock as their commander walked to the edge of the ship, a curious scowl on his face. "Who is the captain here?" he asked, not stepping onto the ship. Ned knew that it would be a dangerous breach of protocol if he were to step aboard without permission. Jorah Fisher stepped forward, leaving the tiller in the command of his first mate. He nodded to the knight. "That would be me, Sarah," he answered. "And who would you be?" the knight barked. "Jorah Fisher, Sarah of the Company of the Rose," he answered proudly. The knight scowled. "The Company of the Rose?" he asked. "Come to fight for the Boltons, have you?" "Well..." Before he could finish, Ned stepped forward. "Septon Marlin, is it not, cousin of Lord Wyman?" The look on the knight's face was priceless. His jaw nearly dropped into the sea, and his eyes widened to comically purported. Ned hid his grin. Sir Marlon Manderly had always been a bit of a stick, but it was nice to catch him off guard now and then. He immediately dropped to his knee. "Lord Stark, we heard you were dead." Ned resisted the urge to smirk. "As you can see, I am not. The men of the Company of the Rose rescued me and brought me home. Not only that, but there are northern lords among them who have been away from home for a long time. Is this how you will welcome home long-lost friends and allies?" The knight shook his head. "Of course not, my lord. Forgive me." Ned nodded. "You are forgiven. Now make sure that these men are given the utmost respect and help should they need it. 4,000 warriors have traveled a long way so that our home can be saved. Of course, my lord. Ser Merlin answered, still on his knee. Ned turned to Jorah, who had a small smile on his face as he watched the byplay. Jorah, please tell Daeron and Stepton to meet me at the castle. The captain of the Fisher King gave a slight bow. Of course, my lord. Ned, with a little bit of help from Fisher, stepped onto the dock, reaching out a hand behind him to help Arya, Sario appearing behind her as well. Now, Ser Marlin, would you be so kind as to escort us to see your cousin? The knight nodded and stood up. At a barked command, the squad formed up on either side of Lord Stark and his daughter, as they began to walk towards the castle. Ned quickly looked around before they left the harbor, catching sight of a sail that he had not seen since Robert's rebellion. Many of these ships do not look like traders, he commented as they walked into the city proper. Quite right, my lord, Ser Merlin said, now over his shock and back to his haughty self. I'm not sure how much you've heard about King Robb's success, but after he defeated Stannis Baratheon at Storm's End, the Masters of Driftmark and the Onion Knight pledged their loyalty to the king, as did a band of Lysan pirates, if I am also correct. After having them capture Dragonstone, they effectively cut off King's Landing from all trade. Up until a few months ago when a large fleet of ships came from Essos, bearing many armed men, and there were even the rumors of dragons. Ser Marlin shook his head. Utter madness, if you ask me, my lord, but the small fleet fled here. They arrived a few days ago. There was word that the last remaining Targaryen girl managed to put together an army, Ned answered. He and Daeron had spoken about it on the voyage from Davos to the north. His cousin still wasn't sure what the entire story was, but the girl now had an army and a fleet. I believe she went back to the castle of her ancestors. I will have to take your word for it, my lord. Septon Marlin said, as they walked. You have arrived right in the nick of time. Oh? Ned asked, a sick feeling seeping into his stomach. Why is that? Your sons are having quite a bit of success. Ser Marlin said, hesitating for some reason on the words sons. King Robb had defeated Tywin Lannister with the help of the Knights of the Vale, who have finally come to their senses, and your natural son is set to take Moat Cailin, if he is not already. Ned then realized why the men hesitated on sons. Ser Marlin is a man set in his ways, and is one who looks down upon bastards. That is good to hear, Ned answered. I am happy that Lady Lysa has finally sent her men to aid Robb. Ser Marlin shook his head. Apparently Lady Lysa Arryn had an unfortunate accident that took the lives of her and her son Robert. A young man by the name of Harold Harding is now Lord of the Eyrie, although I haven't the faintest idea why. Harold Harding, Ned muttered to himself, before the dots connected. He is the grandson of Jon's sister. He was the next in line after Jon's son Robert. The knight nodded. Indeed. Well, he and the forces of the Vale have finally joined the fight. Soon enough, I believe that we will have word that King Robb has taken the capital. By now, the small party had entered the castle and were just outside the doors leading to the Merman's court. Ned turned to Ser Marlin. Sarah, I am sorry if I barked at you earlier. That was wrong of me. The knight shook his head. Quite all right, my lord. Ned nodded and turned as the doors were opened. Ned was the first to enter, his cane marking his every step. Thorol and Arya were right behind him. Sitting on a massive throne in front of him, perched on a mountain of cushions, a platter of food within hand's reach, was Wyman Manderly, Lord of White Harbor. Wyman had always been a massive man, but since the end of Robert's rebellion, he had let himself go. His enormous guts sat casually on his equally fat thighs, while his sausage-like fingers twirled his wispy beard. But for his appearance, all Ned was gazing at was his eyes. Pale blue and intelligent. Lord Stark, Wyman cried, staggering down from his throne and bowing deeply to his liege lord. When I heard that you were alive, I could scarcely believe it. Ned smiled and clasped arms with the fat man. Wyman, it's good to see you again. I can't tell you how glad I am that you have not sided with the Boltons. Wyman snorted. Ooh, Rose tried all kinds of ways to win my allegiance, he said. But he should have known that the North has no king but one, and his name is one. Ned raised an eyebrow. Interesting phrase. Don't think I've ever heard it before. When Bolton sent out messages across the north, declaring himself Lord Paramount and asking for all to bend the knee to him, Maega's youngest, I think, responded with one phrase. That was it. The big lord held his belly and chuckled heartily. Leave it to one of the she-bear's girls to shut the leech lord up. Ned snorted and turned, ushering Arya forward. Lord Wyman, I don't believe you've met my youngest daughter. Arya, meet Lord Wyman Manderly, Lord of White Harbor, Warden of the White Knife, Lord Marshal of the Mander. The big lord smiled kindly at the small girl. My lady, you are a stunning replica of your aunt, if I might say so myself. Arya went to curtsy, but then stopped herself before giving a simple bow. Wyman erupted with laughter. She's a she-wolf, all right, my lord. Wyman, your cousin filled me in, with what's happened with Robb, the Vale, and Jon. Is there anything else I should know? Wyman stomped back to his throne, doing his best to get back on it, with dignity, which he ultimately failed at. When he was finally seated, he popped a piece of fruit in his mouth, and chewed thoughtfully. Had he mentioned the Onion Knight? Wyman asked. Lomas, go fetch the Onion Knight, and Lord Velaryon. Velaryon is here too? Ned asked. Wyman nodded, his forechin wobbling as he did. Indeed, the man brought nearly 500 men with him, along with an impressive fleet. Oh, and a Lysing man that I find quite entertaining. And they're loyal to Robb? Ned asked. Wyman nodded again. I was skeptical myself. He's been my guest until I can get a message to Riverrun. And Stannis, I heard that he died, but I do not have the full facts. Ned continued. Wyman grimaced. I asked the man the very same question, as he was said to be very close with Stannis. Wyman shook his head. Best you hear it from the man himself. I still have trouble believing it. Ned and Wyman waited for a moment before the doors in which the servant had exited were opened, revealing 3 men. The first was easy to recognize, as Ned had met him before. Davos Cyworth had aged slightly, but was still easily recognizable by his simple clothing and his shortened hand. Behind him were 2 men who looked fairly similar to each other. One man wore sea-green silks and had a silver seahorse brooch on his breast. His fair hair and blue-purple eyes marked him as a Velaryon. Based on the way he was dressed, Ned guessed that he was Lord Velaryon. The second man had silver-gold hair and gray-green eyes, wearing neat and well-made sailing clothes, with a wide-brimmed cap and a long, black cane that was lined with sea green. On his black leather vest he wore was a silver seahorse. Lord Stark? Ser Davos said, stopping suddenly before bowing. I did not expect you to be alive. Ned nodded. I heard that the Lannisters faked my death. He turned to the other 2 men. I take it you are Lord Velaryon and... Rainy Waters, my lord, the second man answered simply. Natural son to the late Lord Velaryon. We have not met before, not even at the tourney of Harrenhal. Lord Velaryon spoke up now. I am Montfort Velaryon, master of Driftmark. Ned nodded to him again. Lord Wyman tells me that you are all pledged to my son. We are, my lord, Ser Davos answered. After Lord Stannis was killed outside Storm's End, King Robb asked that we become his allies or his prisoners. All we had to do was, well, make Joffrey's life hell. Ned smiled a little at the man's frankness. And how did he want you to accomplish this? Before the other lords of the Blackwater joined the boy, Joffrey had no fleet save for some traders, Montfort explained. All we had to do was capture any traders going in and out of King's Landing. Cut them at sea, Ned said, and now you are here. Seaworth had ships patrolling around Dragonstone that would get any ships that strayed too close to the island. Rainy Waters said. It was them that saw the fleet and the dragons. Ned glanced at Wyman, who shrugged. You are sure they saw dragons? Seaworth nodded. The men say that they were no bigger than ponies, my lord, but they swear on all the gods that they saw them. Ned stroked his beard. My cousin said much the same thing, he mused. I did, Darren Stark said, marching into the hall with a stout blonde man. Darren bowed to Lord Wyman. My lord, I am Darren Stark, leader of the Company of the Rose. Wyman nodded to the man, but his gaze was on the blonde man, who bowed as well. Well met, cousin. I am Stepton Manderly. Wyman looked stunned. Ned quickly stepped in to explain. When the Company of the Rose was formed, all the houses of the North sent cousins or third sons so that northern houses could live on in case the Targaryens burned the North. Wyman nodded quickly, still shocked, but he understood. Ned turned back to his cousin. Darren, I am glad you are here. This is Ser Davos Seaworth, Lord Velaryon, and his brother Oren Waters. They serve my son. Daeron nodded to them all. Greetings. Sir Davos was Stannis' right-hand man. Ned continued. You said that the details of his death were hazy. Daeron nodded. From what my sources have found, yes. Seaworth scratched his beard, looking like he had aged 5 years. It's a tale that you may not believe, my lord, but it's the truth. I want that to be known before I start. Very well, Ned said. Go on. Lord Stannis had gotten mixed up with a Red Priestess. His older brother, constantly looking over him to congratulate others, might have pushed him towards the woman, but the outcome was the same. He fell under her thrall. Ser Davos began. She was a witch? Ned asked. Seaworth hesitated. I'm not sure what she was, my lord, but she had powers. I know that for sure. She managed to convince Stannis that he was someone called as, Azor Ahai. Daeron helped. It's a fabled hero that's supposed to save the world from a great darkness. It's a myth told by the followers of Rashalar. Seaworth nodded. To the point, my lord, Stannis used this priestess to use some sort of shadow magic that killed Renly and almost King Robb as well. Shadow magic? Daeron asked. She's a shadow binder. Seaworth shrugged. Don't know, my lord. The woman was killed by drowning after Dragonstone had been taken. Probably for the best, Ned said grimly. How did Stannis die? He helped create the creature. Seaworth answered. When your son destroyed one, that harmed Stannis. I saw a thin cut from his collar to his hip that I had never seen before. When the shadow went after King Robb again, and he destroyed it, Stannis died as well. It looked like he had been stabbed in the chest. Daeron nodded, his face just as grim as Ned's. Aye, that sounds right. The only way to kill a shadow demon is with obsidian or Valyrian steel. Robb has Valyrian steel? Ned asked curiously. Seaworth shrugged again. I can't answer that, my lord. All I know is that he is responsible for destroying the demons, and inadvertently killing Stannis, and now Lord Velaryon, Captain Waters, and myself are here. The fleet sailing towards Dragonstone bore the banners of House Targaryen. Then the Targaryen girl has arrived back in Westeros, Ned said, looking at his cousin. Robb must be warned. I will send out a rider and a raven immediately. Wyman offered helpfully. I will see if Alec can get a message to his wife, Daeron added. My lord, you should also know that the Ironborn are mostly gone from the north. Wyman said, switching the conversation point now. All they control now is Deepwood Motte. Ned smiled slightly. So Bolton is alone. Wyman nodded. He's been sitting at the Dreadfort ever since he returned to the north. The Ryswells and the Dustins have been unable to take Eagle's Roost, and Arnulf Karstark has tried twice to take the last hearth, but both attempts have been unsuccessful. His forces are divided, Ned said. The company shall ride out at once, and join with Jon's men at Moat Tylan. I shall send what reinforcements I can, under Saren Marlin's command, Wyman said. Ned nodded. Ser Davos, we will talk more before I leave. For now, there is much to do, and little time to do it. Cousin, he said, turning to Daeron. Welcome back to the north. Tywin IV. Tywin could feel the relief from his men when the antlers came into view. The Lion of Lannister had only a few hundred men left after their disastrous defeat at High Heart, many of which were injured. Many of Tywin's commanders had been lost or captured as well. Of the few riders who were able to escape the combined might of the Riverlanders and Reachmen, they said that Ser Kevan had been killed while trying to rally his men and retreat in an organized fashion. Tywin had taken some small solace in that fact. His brother, his steady, faithful brother, had died doing exactly what Tywin would have expected him to do. The old lord hoped, under his anger and humiliation, that Stark would do the honorable thing and allow Kevan to be sent home to Casterly Rock, where he could be buried with their father and brothers. As for Marbin, Banefort, Westerling, they were all gone. Either dead or captured. Not that Tywin cared. They had all failed him in the end. As had Riker, which Tywin had left in control of Harrenhal with 3,000 men. It would be his fallback option should he be unable to finish off Stark. The Lord of Duskendale had sent a rider after the end of battle, saying that the forces of the Vale had taken the castle and that he was retreating towards King's Landing. They had all failed Tywin. My lord, the men need to rest. Ser Quinn, one of Tywin's retinue, pleaded. Tywin scowled and looked behind him at the ragged and pathetic column, a stark contrast to the mighty force he had marched out of Harrenhal with. Where were the knights, the disciplined infantry? Tywin's men now were no better than beggars and looked like they belonged in the slums of Flea Bottom instead of bearing the lion banner. Fine, Tywin growled. 10 minutes. The knight nodded gratefully and rode back to the others, his voice carrying to them all. Many of them cheered tiredly and simply sat down where they were on the road, reapplying bandages and passing around water skins. "My lord, what will we do now?" One of his knights asked carefully, staying a sword's length from his liege lord. "We will return to King's Landing and prepare for a siege." Tywin gritted out. "There's no other option." The knight's next question was cut off when an arrow pierced his throat. The younger man slumped in his saddle before falling to the ground. There was a small wood, just to Tywin's right, that now erupted with horsemen. They wore mismatched armor, but they all carried swords, shields, spears, and wore gold bands on their arms. One of them carried a banner that Tywin had not seen since he was a young man, fighting on the Steptons with Kevan, Stepton Baratheon, and Aerys Targaryen. A bloody spear, surrounded by skulls on a field of gold, the banner of the Golden Company. Tywin's men didn't even have a chance, as they were massacred by the sellswords, cut down where they sat. Even those who called out for mercy were killed. Tywin's instincts kicked in, and he slapped his heels into his mount, urging it forward and away from the deaths of his men. He had been hoping to make his getaway while his men were slaughtered, but he had no such luck. 3 men had seen him run, and were now chasing him, except their horses weren't as tired as his. One man, armed with a spear, roared and urged his horse faster, gaining on Tywin. The old lord ripped his sword from his scabbard, ready to fight if he needed to. When the man was within reach, just behind him to the left, he swung. The man cried out as the sword cut his face, but he managed to get in an attack of his own before falling from his horse. His spear missed Tywin entirely, instead piercing the heart of the horse Tywin rode. The old lord kicked his feet from the stirrups before the horse catapulted him from the saddle. He landed on his back, losing his sword as the air was taken from his lungs. He was no longer the Lion of Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock, the richest and most feared man in all of Westeros. When he was able to breathe again, he felt the slight tickle of a blade under his throat. Standing above him were the 2 other men who had chased him. One was older, around 40 or 50, with red hair and beard that were starting to turn gray. He wore golden armor with a red wolf cloak over his shoulder. Under one arm was a helm that looked like it had an eagle motif on it. The second person, the one holding his sword to Tywin's throat, was a young man who couldn't be older than 20. He was dressed in black and red armor, with bluish-silver hair. It was the emblem on his tabard that caught Tywin's attention. It was black, with a red 3-headed dragon on it. House Targaryen. Who are you?" The young man smiled grimly. "You don't recognize me. You ordered the death of my mother, myself, and my sister nearly 20 years ago." Tywin frowned before it clicked. "No, that's impossible. You're dead. I saw your body." "You saw the body of a boy from Flea Bottom, who was bought for a jug of arbor gold," the older man replied. "You were duped, Tywin. You made a mistake. Now 20 years later it's come back to haunt you." 20 years too late, the young man practically roared. "You're dead," Tywin said again. "The usurper called me dragon spawn," the young man said, kneeling next to Tywin, still keeping the tip of his blade at Tywin's throat. "I prefer Aegon Targaryen, and this is for my family." Before Tywin could say another word, the young man thrust it into Tywin's throat. All the old lord saw was a large winged shadow flying across the sky before his vision went black. Robb Secton. Robb was finishing up his messages and reports before he was due to meet with the lords of the Vale. Randyll Tarly had sent a rider from the Golden Tooth to try and determine what had happened, and Robb had sent the young man back to the Lord of Hornhill with orders to continue his siege on Casterly Rock and to begin a campaign on the Iron Islands as soon as possible. With the Vale now aiding Robb's weakened and weary force, that left Tarly's host to move on to the raiders who invaded Robb's homeland. Robb had also received a rider from Riverrun from Margaery, whose goal was also to find out the outcome of the battle. The Northern King had again sent the man back with the news that he meant to march towards Harrenhal, and that Margaery could meet him there before they continued their march south to King's Landing to end the war. The young king had also asked the scout for any news of the North, and his brother, Jon, had reached and possibly taken Moat Kylan, which meant that he could now begin his long and arduous task of clearing the north of rebels and raiders. "Your Grace, they're ready," Brienne said, poking her head into the tent. Robb had a new appreciation for the warrior woman. When she had given her oath to Robb at Bitterbridge, Robb expected it to be nothing more than the oath that all his protectors swore. He was wrong. Brienne had been the first one to follow him after he had ridden into the infantry ranks, urging the others to follow as well. Then, during the battle, many of Robb's other guards noted that she had never let Robb out of her sight, cutting down more than a few opponents who had gotten behind the king. The battle made Robb immensely proud and sad at the same time. He and his guards had stood shoulder to shoulder on the front lines against the Lannister army, never backing down. But like all battles, there was also immense loss. Robb had lost another 10,000 men from his combined force. Ser Robbar and Ser Robbar had been injured. Lord Estermont had been killed, speared by a Lannister knight. But his losses weren't as severe as the Lannisters. Tywin lost 17,000 men, his top 2 enforcers in the mountain, and Amory Lorch had been captured. And Lord Marbrand had been found dead as he had been commanding the enemy front lines when the Vale cavalry had arrived. Perhaps the biggest blow to Tywin had been the death of Kevan Lannister, his younger brother. The old knight had been identified by Sarah Brynden, who had ordered the body cleaned and made presentable for his final trip to Casterly Rock. "Flashback, Uncle," Robb greeted, stomping through the mud to reach the old knight. The Blackfish looked a little battered and bruised, but he showed no signs of being hurt. He stood with his arms crossed over a body, as the Silent Sisters worked. "Is everything all right?" Sarah Brynden nodded slowly. "This is Kevan Lannister." Robb raised an eyebrow. Now that he looked at the body, taking in the golden hair and the lion motif armor, it did look like a Lannister. "How did he die?" "Sword through the side," Ser Brynden grunted. It was the end of the battle and Garland's force had swung around the hill and had flanked them. Then the general retreat was sounded and he was trying to rally his men for an organized withdrawal and didn't see the Stormlander. Robb nodded. "Was he a good man?" Ser Brynden nodded. "I fought with him in the War of the Ninepenny Kings. Tywin was never one for honor. He believed it got in the way of efficiency, but Kevan was a good man." Hoster joked that he was Tywin's humanity. "I will make sure he is returned to Casterly Rock," Robb promised. But the Blackfish waved it off. "I will take care of that myself, Your Grace," he said, glancing at Robb. "I thought I looked bad." Robb chuckled. "I fought with Lord Forrester in the infantry." "Aye, I saw," Sarah Brynden replied. "Couldn't quite catch your speech, but your men liked it." "They fought well," Robb complimented. "Never underestimate the courage and ferocity that men will fight with when they have a purpose. Again, you fighting on the front lines helped us win. You showed your faith in your men, and they replied." Sarah Brynden said, turning from the body to look at Robb. "I told your father the very same thing during Robert's rebellion." Robb smiled. "I sometimes forget how old you are." Ser Brynden scoffed. "Edamure wishes I was older and would quite reminding him of his fuck-ups." Robb chuckled as the two men stood in silence on the battlefield, watching as Septas, healers, and Silent Sisters went about their work. Bodies, both alive and dead, were being loaded on wagons and taken back to camp. "How many did we lose?" Brynden asked. Robb shook his head. "We'll talk about that tomorrow. Right now, we'll save who we can." "Fair enough. What's our next step?" Ser Brynden asked, changing the question. According to Lord Royce, Lord Redfort and the rest of the Vale forces marched on Harrenhal, cutting off Tywin from taking safety in the ruins. Robb explained, "We'll stay here for a day or two, recover what we can, and then move on towards Harrenhal." "So Lysa's changed her mind," Sarah Brynden mused. "Took her long enough." Robb hesitated. "I'm not too sure. There was a young man with Lord Royce who introduced himself as Harold Arryn." "Harold Arryn?" Ser Brynden asked, clearly surprised. "I know of Harold Harding, Robert Arryn's cousin and heir. How has he become an Arryn?" Robb shook his head. "I'm just as curious, but we'll know tomorrow. I'll hold a council with Lord Royce and this new Lord Arryn, and we'll figure out what has happened." Flashback. "My lords, I am glad to see that you all made it through the battle," Robb said, sitting down with his council. "I am especially glad to welcome our new friends Lord Harold Arryn and Lord Jon Royce of the Vale. We are deeply saddened and embarrassed that it had taken so long for us to fight with our friends and allies, but we are here now and we hope to help finish this war." Harold Arryn declared strongly. Wise words, my lord. Lord Forrester praised. When we last met, you were Harold Hardying, Sir Brynden said. What's happened to my niece? Royce and Arryn shared a worried glance before the latter responded. During the entire war, Lords Royce, Dreadfort, Hunter, and Lady Waynewood had been pushing Lady Lysa to join on her family's side. He started. The North Riverlands and Vale had fought together in Robert's rebellion, and we wanted to do so again. Lord Royce here was the figurehead for this movement. When the Reach and the Stormlands pledged themselves to King Robb, we thought that it would be enough to alleviate all of Lady Lysa's worries, the old lord said, taking up the story. It almost worked until Petyr Baelish, that treacherous worm, came to the Vale and filled Lysa's head with his poison. Baelish, Sir Brynden asked. He's the boy that grew up with Lysa and Cat at Riverrun. He was deeply in love with Cat, but I heard rumors that Lysa was deeply in love with him. Obsession is a better word for her love for the man. Sir Brynden, Royce replied grimly. He quickly took control of Vyrie, and Lysa was his puppet. They soon announced their intent to marry each other. There was even word that Lady Lysa would step aside and name Baelish Lord Protector of the Vale. That is when Lord Royce and his supporters traveled to the Eyrie to plead their case in person. The young Lord Arryn explained. For weeks, day after day, they went into the throne room and were rebuked. When the Ironborn attacked the North and the Boltons betrayed his grace, Baelish effectively tried to eradicate all of our hard work with Lady Lysa. Finally, we had enough. Lord Royce said, laying a fatherly hand on the young man next to him. Lord Harold stepped up next to me and declared that he and others would be sending aid to King Robb, without Lady Lysa's blessing. She and her guards attempted to apprehend us, but we cut them down, Harold said almost proudly. That's when things went south. How do you mean? Robb asked, engrossed in the story. Lady Lysa lost her senses. Perhaps due to the bloodshed or something in her mind gave away, but she clutched her son close to her and began ranting madly. Arryn answered. Something about him being hers. She did everything he asked, saying that we could not take him from her. She had backed herself up against the open moon door, and that's when she mentioned that she killed that horrible old man. Arryn shook his head. She admitted there that she killed her husband Jon Arryn, before stepping back and falling. She fell, Robb asked, confused. The moon door is a circular door in the center of the throne room, in the Vale. Sir Brynden explained, those who fall through fall to their death on the mountains below. If what Sir Brynden says is right, then the man that Lysa was referring to has to be Baelish. Lord Royce said, she must have believed that we meant to take him away from her. Besides growing up, did the two ever come in contact? Lord Forrester asked curiously. Baelish was named Master of Coin during Robert's reign, Lord Karen said. Apparently Lady Lysa recommended him to her husband. So, my aunt was the man's puppet all her life, Robb sighed. With him in control of the Vale, he would have sent you all to aid the Lannisters, clearly believing that your honor would bind you to him. Baelish fled during the fight. Lord Arryn said angrily. He must have had a plan ready, because we searched long into the night for him. When Lysa fell, she brought her son with her. Sir Brynden asked. Lord Jon nodded. She did, and though I grieve for the boy, I am not sure how much he would have been able to accomplish alive. He was a sickly creature who, even at his age, was still nursed by his mother. Robb went pale. He was 8, wasn't he? Royce nodded. Indeed, your grace, it's as foul as it sounds. And how are you related to Jon Arryn? Robb asked, looking at the new Lord Arryn. I am his sister's grandson. He responded easily. Robb nodded. I would like to say I will grieve for my aunt, but may the old gods forgive me, if she was willing to send her men to attack her family. I will not grieve much. Sir Brynden, you remember seeing the woman when she returned to the Vale after Jon's death? Lord Royce said, looking at the elderly knight. Would you say that she had all her senses? Sir Brynden shook his head. I would not. Grieve for the loss of a family member, your grace, but not for the woman herself. Lord Royce advised, looking at Robb. Thank you, my lord, Robb said, and thank you for fighting in my name. I understand that it couldn't have been easy fighting with the wife of your liege lord. In the Vale, we stick by our friends. Lord Royce said seriously, and your father was a friend to us all. Indeed, and now we are poised to avenge his death, Robb said, segueing into his next point of discussion. Lord Redfort and the rest of the Vale forces have captured Harrenhal, and with Tywin's host broken, we now have a clear path to King's Landing. Your Grace. What about the Dornish? Ser Donal asked. They abandoned the Lannisters during the battle, Robb said. Lord Blackwood said that he noticed their disappearance just moments before the men of the Vale arrived. I believe that the Dornish commander might have been playing with Tywin. How so? Lord Caron asked curiously. My lords, we have always wondered how Tywin got the Dornish to fight with him, Robb explained. What if their goal was to exact some sort of revenge against the man for the part he played in Princess Ilya's death? So they fight for him, then desert him in his moment of need, Garland mused. It's possible. That still means that they fought against us. You know how many they slaughtered at Harrenhal. Yes, and they will pay for that because we have leverage against them, Robb said with a slight smirk. We have the Mountain and Amory Lorch. The men who murdered Elia Martell, Lord Royce said. Correct, Robb replied. When we are done with the Lannisters, we will make sure that the Martells do not go unpunished. What are your orders, Your Grace? Darlan asked, setting up Robb. We will spend another day here before moving on to connect with Lord Redfort at Harrenhal, Robb said firmly. Lord Tyrell in the west will soon have orders telling him to take the Iron Islands. My brother Jon should now have Moats Cailin and will have begun his campaign to free the north. This war is almost done, my lords, and soon we will be victorious, and our friends and loved ones will have not died in vain. Daenerys Dany had expected more of her ancestor city. Ser Willem Darry, the elderly knight who had lived with her and her brother in Bravos, had told her stories of her family and their city of King's Landing. The Dragon Pit was a ruin, but still reminded all those who loved in the city why House Targaryen ruled Westeros. The Sept of Baelor was a truly beautiful cathedral to behold, hiding the fanatics and greedy priests within. Then there was the Red Keep itself, still filled with banners and ironwork portraying lions and stags. The city was supposed to be alive day and night with people from everywhere in the world. Merchants would be selling their wares. The harbor would be filled with ships from the other cities in Westeros and from free cities. Gold cloaks would patrol the streets, respected and admired by those they protect. What Daenerys found was a half-starved city on the brink of madness and rioting, with its citizens dressed more like beggars than civilized people. The city watchmen were no better than uniformed thugs, who did nothing but drink and spend their time with whores. It was a depressing sight for the young queen. Your Grace, is all well? Ser Barristan asked, standing at attention. The older man looked resplendent in his white armor and flowing white cape. Dany nodded. Yes, sorry. What is it you want? The small council is meeting, Your Grace. Ser Barristan replied easily. Daenerys nodded and gestured for the old knight to lead on. Together, the pair strode out of Maegor's holdfast and reached the council chambers within a few minutes. Ser Barristan had been a protector to 4 kings and knew the Red Castle like the back of his hand. Inside, seated around a large table, was Dany's makeshift council, Lord Ardrian Celtigar, Lord of Claw Isle and Master of Ships, sat across from Prince Doran Martell, the Master of Whispers. Varys, the Master of Whispers, sat across from the Hand of the King, Jon Connington, and the Master of Coin Garrus, Edorian, the Paymaster of the Golden Company. Rounding out the table was Dany's betrothed and nephew, Aegon. Dany still wasn't sure to think of her nephew. She had been shocked when the Golden Company had arrived in Pentos, the young man at its head, wearing black armor, and wearing a cape with the Targaryen sigil. He certainly looked like family, with silver blonde hair still tinged blue and blue-purple eyes. With the advice of Varys, Ser Barristan and Jon Connington, the two had announced their plans to wed each other when they had taken Dragonstone, declaring that they would not be wed until Westeros was theirs once more. I am sorry for my lateness, my lords. Dany apologized, taking her seat at the other end of the table, with Ser Barristan taking the seat to her right. As of right now, both she and her nephew had different groups of sworn swords. His was made up of sellsword knights, while hers was made up of those who had served her for the past year or more. Quite all right, Aegon said with a bright smile. We were just about to discuss what we should do with our prisoners. I would hear the thoughts of our counselors as to what should be done with them, Dany said, opening the floor for others to speak as well. I thought the matter was quite simple, Aegon said, his smile not quite as bright. They are traitors, who served the usurper, and his supposed son. Death is the only sentence. Dany raised an eyebrow. For some, that seems acceptable, but what about Tommen Baratheon? He's a boy. Aegon hesitated. Fair point. My lords, let us have your thoughts. Your graces, for Cersei and her eldest son Joffrey, execution fits the crime. Prince Doran replied easily. His Kingsguard should be sent to the wall. Perhaps not all. Varys countered regretfully. Sandor Clegane is an interesting case. He was found with Sansa Stark when we took the castle. Sir Barristan added. It seems he abandoned Joffrey to protect the girl. Aegon shrugged. So what? Sandor Clegane is known as the Hound for a reason. Sire, Varys explained. He has also been, for reasons unknown, Sansa Stark's defender. He saved her without orders during a riot, and also was the first to clothe her in his cloak, after she had been beaten by Meryn Trant. She's probably betting him, Connington said dismissively. Varys shook his head. My little birds have been watching Sansa Stark ever since the death of her father. She is nothing but a frightened girl far from her home and her family. The only people who seemed to care about her were Tyrion Lannister and Sandor Clegane. Are we taking Clegane's head off or not? Egan snapped impatiently. More to the fact, what are we doing with the Stark girl? She will not be harmed, Dany said instantly, gazing sternly at her nephew. If Clegane is no longer loyal to Joffrey, then I see no reason why he can't act as his sworn sword for the time being. Your Grace Sandor Clegane is the brother of the Mountain, Don Connington argued. He's possibly the only man capable of killing his brother. All the more reason to keep him alive, Dany said easily. Once we have our hands on the Mountain, why not have his brother fight him? If the Hound dies, then so does a traitor. If he kills the Mountain, then Elia Martell's death is avenged. All the while, no warrior loyal to us dies, because of that beast. Dany resisted the urge to notice Prince Doran's sneer when his sister's killer was mentioned. According to his brother Prince Oberyn, the Mountain was now the Stark's prisoner, along with Amory Lorch, giving the Northern King 3 men who were instrumental in her family's downfall. Forgive me, Your Grace, but what will be done with the Stark girl? Lord Celtigar asked, the old man looking bored out of his mind. Her brother has been proclaimed king by 4 kingdoms. 5. Sarah Barristan corrected quietly. He now has the armies of the Vale on his side as well. His sister can be used as leverage to take the man's crown, Aegon said with a dismissive wave. Sarah Barristan shifted in his seat, clearly not agreeing with the young king. Aegon noticed this and leaned forward. Unless you feel differently, Sarah Barristan. Your Grace, the Lannisters didn't even attempt to trade the girl for the Kingslayer when he was captured. Varys said, helping the old knight. If he's not willing to give up one man, I doubt he'll be willing to give up his kingdoms. Not even for his family? Dany asked curiously. Varys shook his head. I cannot speak for Robb Stark, but I do not believe his lords will agree with the trade. Perhaps we should table the discussion of the Starks for the time being. Prince Doran offered. What of Baelish, Pycelle, and the Imp? They can die with Cersei and the boy, Aegon said. The young man had led the charge in the taking of the Red Keep, yet his bloodlust has yet to be sated. Varys tilted his head. Pycelle and Baelish can. I would hold the headsman's sword with Tyrion Lannister. Why is that, Lord Varys? Dany asked. While Joffrey and Cersei have committed horrible atrocities, Pycelle is a loyal agent for the Lannisters, and Baelish is simply better dead than alive. Tyrion Lannister is the only reason why the city hasn't already fallen to fire and ruin. Varys explained. He did his best to make sure that the people of the city were fed. He replaced the command of the City Watch with a man who did a very good job at cutting away the corruption in the higher ranks. He protected Sansa Stark among others. His family helped the usurper take our throne. Aegon growled. Varys tutted. His father and brother played their part, but he was a young boy when that all happened. Aegon looked ready to attack the Varys, but Dany quickly stepped in. Perhaps it is best if we decide the Imp's fate at a later time. She offered, but Baelish and Pycelle shall join Cersei and her son on the block. I believe Prince Doran's idea of sending the former Kingsguard to the wall is a sound idea that might win us favor with the Starks. Sarah Barristan added, they are disgraces to the Cloaks, but they are still knights nonetheless. Sound idea, Jon Connington said. Now Varys, what should we know about the city? It's in a dire state, I'm afraid. The spymaster answered. Food is scarce. It's on the brink of rioting every day. The Queen's Unsullied have done an excellent job of keeping the peace, but they will only do much against starved and frantic commoners, who see that the only people eating are those in the Red Keep. What would you have us do? Connington grumbled angrily. The Reach and the Riverlands are sworn to the Stark boy. Tyrion Lannister had a rather brilliant idea, Varys said slowly. We could open trade up as soon as possible, lowering import taxes for the ship captains who bring in hard rations from the free cities. Easier said than done, I'm afraid. Prince Doran replied. Mayor, Tyrush and Lysa are quite angry with the king and queen for taking all the mercenary companies. See if Penos and Bravos will be willing to help us, Dany said, looking at Varys. I will also put Ser Jorah to the task of rebuilding the gold cloaks. I will have to ask Illyrio for more money, but I will see what I can do, Varys promised. Is there anything else that needs to be discussed? Eddard asked, looking as bored as Lord Celtigar, now that the prospect of death was no longer being talked about. I believe that is all, Your Grace, Connaughton said, glancing at his reports. Good, Aegon said, getting out of his seat and striding out of the room without another word. Connaughton tried to cover for the boy. We will meet again in a few days, my lords. Thank you, he said, before following after the king. Varys, would you please accompany me? Dany asked, catching the spymaster before he could leave. The eunuch simply bowed and began to walk with the queen, Sarah Barristan following close behind. They walked for a few moments before they found themselves in the Godswood. Bestial sounds, smoke, and the smell of burned meat came from the other end of the wooded area, where Dany's 3 dragons lived. After seeing the caves in the dragon pit, she had decided that the Godswood would be much better for her children. Is everything all right, Your Grace? Varys asked, finally, as they sat down on a stone bench close to a small pool. What can you tell me about Robb Stark, the king in the north? Dany asked. Varys folded his hands inside of his sleeves, sighing. I wish I could tell you that he's a bad man who is cruel and terrible, but he's the exact opposite. His men love him. He's respected by every lord under his banner. Even the small folk are on his side because they see him as a savior of sorts. Savior? Varys nodded. Stannis Baratheon made sure that the realm knew of Joffrey's parentage, just as the war between the Starks and Lannisters was heating up. His bastard status, combined with the acts that were committed in his name, he and his mother practically drove the commoners to Robb Stark's cause. The spymaster explained, according to my little birds, Robb Stark is his father's son. Brave, honorable, and good. Dany frowned. His father was a traitor, she said flatly. Varys arched an eyebrow and looked at the queen. Ned Stark was many things, Your Grace, but he had his reasons for fighting. Reasons I have no wish to hear about, Dany snapped irritably. Will Robb Stark give up his crown, if we ask? Varys shook his head sadly. I don't believe so. He has the army, the name, the wife. King Aegon's idea to leverage Sansa Stark is wishful thinking. He's won regardless of everything that's been thrown at him. Traitorous lords. Ironborn raiders. He went toe-to-toe with Tywin Lannister, and almost won the first time, if not for the Dornish cavalry. Dany folded her legs and gazed into the clear water, thinking deeply. She had been expecting to return to Westeros to a hero's welcome, commoners and nobles alike, ready to flock to her banner and fight against the Lannisters and Baratheons. She knew that there would be resistance, and anyone with power is always unwilling to give it up without a fight, but she had not expected this. 5 kingdoms, a 6th nearly conquered save for 1 castle, have already pledged themselves to a new monarch. Even houses that have always been loyal to House Targaryen, such as House Derry, Velaryon, and Grafton, were unwilling to fight for Dany and her nephew. All Dany had was a mismatched army of sellswords, Dornish, Unsullied, Crownlanders, and Dothraki, none of whom had ever fought together before. Now they might have to face an army who had fought and bled together under the command of a man who had beaten Tywin Lannister on the battlefield. It also helped that the Stark army had the means to feed itself and other allies across Westeros to call upon. Thank you for your honesty, my lord, Dany said finally. Varys stood and bowed to the queen. I understand that this is not what the homecoming you expected, but I do believe that if we can bring Robb Stark to the table, we can work out a way where both parties are happy and Westeros does not have to endure any more bloodshed. Dany gazed at her spymaster. Do you think that we cannot win if we fight the Stark boy? Varys shook his head. Not at all, your grace, but the people are tired of war. The Lannisters were roundly hated by all, but House Stark has always been loved. If we can get them to agree to peace, then it will heal the wounds created by the rebellion 20 years ago. Dany nodded slowly. I will think about it. Varys smiled and bowed before leaving. Dany stayed where she was, gazing at the pool. Sarah Barristan was her silent shadow, as he had been since they had taken Dragonstone. He had always been a figure of quiet strength and sage wisdom. Do you think I should give up my ancestors' kingdom all because the small folk don't want war? Dany asked, not looking at the knight. I agree with Varys, my queen, Barristan answered, moving forward to stand beside the bench. The Starks are loved by many. If we can forge an alliance with Robb Stark, then Westeros could finally heal as one. Or it would give Robb Stark time to rest his army before wiping us off the face of the continent, Dany said bitterly. Seth the Barristan shook his head. I do not believe that he would do that, the knight answered thoughtfully. From my experience with his father and what Varys's informants, Robb Stark does not seem like the kind of man to judge a person on the reputation of their family. So you love the man too? Dany sighed. Perhaps I should have sought the advice of my nephew in his hand. Lord Connington and the king have their view colored, my queen, Barristan said. Life as a sellsword can do that. I believe that cooler heads might provide a better solution than war. Dany's side held her anger in check. All she wanted was for someone to say that Robb Stark had no right to wear a crown, but none had. From the tone Varys and Barristan spoke in, they sounded like Stark deserved the crown more than she did. She wasn't sure why she wanted to be told that Robb Stark was her enemy. Perhaps Aegon was rubbing off on her. Come, Sarah Barristan, Dany said, rising gracefully and walking out of the godswood. We have a wolf to prepare for. Jorah 6. Are you sure? Jon asked, looking at the scout. The man nodded. I saw them, never seen that sigil before, but it looked to be about 4,000 men. Sell swords, I think? Jon sighed. Thank you. You can go. The man bowed and left, leaving the bastard of Winterfell alone with his commanders, each waiting for the young man to speak first. With Robb, they had found out that they could debate amongst themselves, and he would silence them when he had his plan. With Jon, he needed it a bit more quiet for him to think. They figured this out after he left the tent twice to be away from the shouting. Does anyone recognize the device? Jon asked the table. A white rose on a field of gray. Company of the Rose. Howland Reed grunted. Rose hired sellswords. Lord Karstark growled. Probably paid for them with Lannister gold. What do we know about them? Jon continued. The company was formed by northern nobles who refused to bend the knee to Aegon the Conqueror. Galbart Glover answered, they probably saw a chance to retake some of their ancestral seats by fighting for the Boltons. We can't split up the army, Jon sighed, crossing his arms. There's no way 5,000 men can take on 4,000 sellswords, and however many men Roose has. What do you propose? Glover asked. Jon screwed his mouth shut, thinking quickly. We'll keep the army together. We don't have a choice. If we split, then we could very well lose half the army. Which way do we go then? The Grayton rumbled. West, Jon answered. We'll send parties to capture the Rills and Barrowton while the bulk of our force heads towards Eagle's Roost. From there, a portion of our force will continue north and retake Deepwood Motte, while the rest of us march east and deal with the Boltons. What about Last Hearth? The Grayton demanded. Roose will most likely call Arnulf back when he sees that Risewell and the Dustins have been destroyed. Jon explained, trying to think of what he would do in Roose's position. He'll dig into the Dreadfort and prolong his failed rebellion as long as he can to maximize casualties. If he doesn't, Karstark barked. Then Lord Umber and yourself can go track the man down and take his head. Jon answered firmly. If Bolton is foolish enough to leave him in the field, we'll make him pay. The northern lords growled their agreement. Septuellus will take 500 cavalry and take the Rills, same with Darren Hornwood and Barrowton. Jon finished. The rest of us will march towards Eagle's Roost. Line break, Bowden Hawker. The captain of the Seahawk felt a savage smile spread across his face as he read the little sheet of parchment in his hands. The message from his brother was short and to the point. The lords of the north were back and coming with a vengeance. All Bowden had to do was hold out a little while longer. My lord, is all well? the maester asked, poking his head into the solar. The man was covered with sweat and blood after spending hours with the injured. Just fine, Malos. What's wrong? Bowden asked, putting the message down. The enemy is attacking again. Your presence has been requested, the maester said grimly. Bowden sighed and grabbed his weapons, still stained with blood from the previous fights, and thrusted them through his war belt. Striding out of the room, Ryswell had finally breached the outer walls, and had forced the defenders to the main keep. Bowden had a few hundred men left of the 1,000 he had started with, but for each man he lost, Ryswell lost 2. He must have lost almost 2,000 of his men already. When the man emerged from the keep, he found himself in the middle of a war zone. Archers fired down on the attackers, and brave townsfolk, who were fighting to protect their home, hurled rocks and whatever else they could get their hands on. To Bowden's right, 50 more defenders hastily made their way out of barracks. Fully armed and armored, they were not the sailors that had served so well as city defenders. But these were the actual watchmen of Eagle's Roost, leather and chainmail-clad men who were well trained with spear, harpoon, bow, and short sword. On me, Bowden barked, drawing his cutlass and storming up the steps to the battlements. Hold! Hold! Bowden, never one to leave the fighting to his men, had taken part in every single engagement between his men and Ryswell, no matter how minor. Even if it was a light 30-man party sent to probe the defenses, Bowden was there with a bow in his hands and blood on his mind. Together, backed up by 50 trained guardsmen, Bowden stormed up and down the battlements, helping push back defenders wherever they came, screaming over the wall. His cutlass was swung with so much fury that it practically cut men in two, severing arms, legs, and heads with a single blow. "We do not break, we do not flee," Bowden bellowed. The fight was short and bloody, lasting only half an hour before calls to retreat came from the enemy. Ryswell was playing the slow game with Bowden, and it greatly annoyed the man. He would throw his men at the defenders in waves, slowly breaking them down for a few days, before he would overwhelm them with numbers. It was the same tactic he used at the main gate. "How many men?" Bowden growled, as a captain ran up to him. "Another 50 or so," the man answered grimly. "A dozen or so are injured." "Get them to Malos," Bowden ordered. "Make sure the walls are restocked with ammunition." "We're running low, my lord," the man answered. "We will run out in a few days." "I know," Bowden said. "That's when they'll try to take the castle. Break down anything that's not essential to the castle. Chairs, tables, even bed frames. I want them sharpened and used when we run out of arrows and rocks." The man paled slightly and nodded, running off. Bowden marched back into the castle, striding past medics as they rushed out to help the injured and dying. Master Malice's supplies were stretched as thin as possible, and used when absolutely necessary. "Get here soon, Roland," Bowden muttered to himself. "Or else we're all dead men." Line break. Asha. The Dreadfort looked unimpressive to the Ironborn. True, it was the middle of the night, so it looked more like a black mass against the land lighted by the moon and stars, but there was nothing extraordinary about it. Asha and her men had passed the ruins of Winterfell while heading east. That had been impressive to behold. Compared to it, the Dreadfort looked like a hunting lodge. "We're ready," one of the raiders whispered to Asha. The captain of the Black Wind nodded and began to make her way towards the castle, her men following close behind. 6 of her raiders had climbing grapnels in their hands. They would serve as their entry into the castle, and out if all went to plan. Truth be told, Asha didn't have much of a plan for saving her brother. Deepwood Mata had nothing valuable to help with the rescue mission, so she was going in blind with the hope that she would be able to find her brother and get him out before anyone noticed what was happening. It took a few moments for the raiders to reach the walls. They had pressed themselves against the western wall, with Asha keeping her eyes up towards the top of the wall, where 2 sentries leaned on their spears next to a burning brazier, bundled in their cloaks. Asha turned her gaze on her men with bows in their hands, holding up 2 fingers to indicate the number of men on the wall. They nodded and laid arrows on their strings before moving a little ways away from the wall, giving themselves better angles to get their shots off. All 4 men fired, and the sound of 2 bodies crumpling soon followed. Asha's men were adept at firing from the rolling deck of a ship at sea. On solid ground, shooting targets who weren't moving, it was like killing fish in a barrel. "Go," Asha barked quietly. The raiders with the grapnels moved away from the wall, swinging the iron hook in their hands before throwing them up the wall. The nearest man to Asha tested the hook, making sure it was firmly caught before handing the trailing rope to his captain, who took it and quickly began to scramble up the wall. Her men followed suit. Soon, there were a dozen men and her on the walls. "The rest of you stay there," Asha called in a loud whisper over the wall. "Two of you grab their cloaks and spears. Pretend you're the guards." 2 men immediately stepped forward and took the spears and cloaks from the northerners before throwing the bodies over the walls. In the firelight, the cloaks disguised their chainmail and leather armor that bore the sigil of House Greyjoy. "The rest of you, follow me," Asha ordered, taking the axes from her belt and moving quickly down the wall and towards the keep. As soon as the Ironborn were in the keep, Asha took the first turn she came across and strode quickly down the hall, her gaze sweeping side to side for any clue as to where Theon might be, her ears strained to hear anything. After a few minutes of searching, she and her men came to a point where there were a set of stairs leading up and leading down. Asha briefly remembered her Nukel Roderick, telling her and Theon stories about Westeros whenever he visited their mother on Pike before her father's rebellion. He told them of the Long Night and the Age of Heroes, the Targaryen conquest, and many other stories. One of his darker stories had been about the war waged between the Starks and Boltons for control of the North. He had said that the Boltons were renowned for their love of flaying and how the Red Kings would wear the skin of flayed Starks as capes. Part of the story was a rumor about a room in the Dreadfort where the skins still existed. "Down," Asha said, slowing descending the stairs. The new hallway was lit with only a few torches, making the area looking even more sinister for whatever reason. The daughter of Balon Greyjoy felt like she had ravens fluttering in her stomach, and it made her feel like she was ready to puke, but she knew that was just fear, and pushed the nerves back down. At the end of the hall was a door that was different than the others. There were iron bars where there would normally be a window, and the wood was reinforced with black iron. The biggest difference was the lock under the handle. Asha slammed the back of her axe on the lock, breaking it before pushing the door open. The room was damp and dreary, with a small barred window set high on the wall opposite of the door. There was also the stench of shit, blood, and something she couldn't describe, but it made her cover her nose with her arm as soon as she stepped inside. In the center of the room, next to a table with bloody knives and other instruments, was a giant wooden X with a bloody, beaten, disfigured man strapped to it, his head covered with a sack. Asha pulled the sack off and cursed violently when she found herself looking at the bloody and scared face of her brother. "Held me," Asha snapped, pulling at the leather straps that kept her brother up. 2 more Ironborn came forward and freed his other hand and his feet. When he was free, he slumped against Asha, barely alive. "Grab him," Asha said, still shocked and stunned at what she saw. Her brother was almost bone-thin, his feet and hands covered with blood-stained rags that showed he was missing most of his fingers and toes. His torso and legs were hatch-marked with cuts and bruises. The most unsettling was the massive red blotch on the undergarment her brother wore. With the show once again in the lead, she and her men moved as fast as they could back through the castle, cutting down anyone who got in their way. As soon as they were out, they headed back up the steps to the battlements where they had gotten into the castle. Standing over the 2 dead bodies of her crew was a pale, big-boned young man, shirtless and garbed in boots and leather breeches. He wielded 2 cleaver-like swords and had an insane smile on his ugly face. "Well, hello there," he said gleefully, the men at his back readying their weapons. "Leaving so soon?" Asha glanced at the grapples, wondering where the rest of her men were at. She had left nearly 50 men at the bottom of the wall. They would have noticed if something was wrong. "I'm sure you're wondering where your friends are," the shirtless man said, gesturing with one sword towards the wall. "Take a look." Asha shuffled towards the wall, keeping one eye on the man, glanced over the edge of the wall. Her entire crew lay slaughtered at the base of the wall. "You'll pay for that," Asha growled, readying her weapons.
"You're a feisty one."
The man snapped. "You'll be fun to break." Asha roared and threw herself at the man, her men at her back. The fighting was fierce, but the Boltons had more men, and soon it began to tell. Her men began to go down all around her, till it was just her, and 3 of her men, their backs against the battlements. The pale man smiled evilly. He had cut down 3 of her men himself, practically hacking them to pieces. Asha glanced towards Than's body, shivering and still unconscious on the walkway. She had traveled across the north to get him back, and now she was about to die herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The Boltons charged forward, killing her last 3 men as Asha threw herself over the edge of the wall, nearly snapping her arm from her body as she caught herself on one of the ropes. She cried out as the rope burned and ruined her palm, but she fought through the pain and made it to the ground, running as fast as her legs could carry her back towards their camp and the rest of her men. "I'll be back, Theonon," Asha swore, humiliation and fury burning the oath into her brain. Victarion. Oldtown was an old and proud city, boasting the High Tower, a giant lighthouse that had been built before man had crossed the Arm of Dorne. Starry Sept, former center of the Faith of the Seven, and the Citadel, where maesters were trained. It was a hub for trading and a city that rivaled Lancelsport and King's Landing. In the golden days of the Iron Islands, before the Targaryens had taken over with their dragons, the city had been attacked many times by the Ironborn. Now the city was ripe for the taking. Their fleet was up the coast in the Westerlands with the Red Wines, and their city was left defenseless against the Iron Fleet. Victarion had split his fleet in half, one portion led by Gorold Goodbrother and the other by himself. The Honeywine River split the city in half, and each fleet's mission was to take on half of the city. Victarion stood on the bow of his ship, the Iron Victory, armored in heavy plate armor, a thick golden cloak, and had a steel battle-axe in one hand and his kraken helm in his other. The new moon was out, and the stars did nothing to illuminate the fleet of dark ships that glided like wolves, stalking towards the peaceful city. The Lord Captain had planned the attack with painstaking detail. He would not allow anyone to fuck up. The invasion in the north had reminded Westeros that the Ironborn were still around. Sacking Oldtown would remind them why they were feared. The High Tower sat on an island where the Honeywine met the open sea, the fire at its top shining light on the golden kraken on the sails of the ships. Horns began to sound from the tower, and soon after the calls were echoed back by the harbor walls. "Run, little sheep," Victarion muttered, putting on his helm. The hull of the Iron Victory came to a stop, after running up on the beach, and Victarion was one of the first off the ship, launching himself down onto the firm ground as more and more ships hit the beach. As soon as he slung his shield onto his arm, arrows began flying all around him as the panicked defenders ran to defend the walls. "Come on," Victarion roared to his crew, charging up the beach. A sortie of defenders emerged from the small gate that separated the harbor from the city. They were armed with spears and shields, armored in chainmail. But Victarion could see in their eyes fear. They had been caught with their breeches around their ankles, and all they could do was delay the inevitable. He hit them like a one-man battering ram. His axe hacked off one man's arm before whirling around and smashing into the ribs of the man next to him. His crew soon joined him and tore into the defenders like sharks who smelt blood in the water. "Take the gate," Victarion roared. Hundreds of Ironborn had joined Victarion at this point, and while the defenders fought with all they had, it wasn't enough. For each raider that went down, 3 more defenders went down from the hail of arrows, axes, and spears. After a few minutes of a handheld battering ram hammering at the gates, the reinforced doors finally gave in and swung open, still barely attached to their hinges. The Ironborn poured in like an unstoppable wave, cutting down anyone who got in their path. Victarion's crew stuck close to him, knowing their captain had a special mission of his own. "Greyjoy," one man shouted, charging down the steps. He was armored in chainmail, and had the sigil of House Tyrell on his tabard. Behind him were a dozen or so defenders. The two groups met with a clash of steel, as Victon and the Tyrell warrior faced off in the middle of it all. "Before I kill you, who do I fight?" Victarion asked, his voice booming under his helm. "I am Ser Morin Tyrell, and I will die before I let you take the city," the knight cried, attacking Victarion. The two fought for a few minutes, testing each other's defenses. Ser Morin used the speed his weapon allowed him to his advantage against the heavily armed and armored Victarion, but it soon became clear that the Lord Captain was the better fight. Victarion roared and shoulder-charged the knight, causing him to stumble back right into Victarion's axe. Since the man had no helm, the battle-axe practically cut the man's head in two, splattering the Ironborn with blood and brain. The Lord Captain pulled his axe from the bloody mess and strode off, his crew finishing off Ser Morin's men before following him. Line break. Samwell. The large young man came awake from someone shaking his shoulder. It was another acolyte. His eyes were wide with fear and his mouth was moving, but no words came out. Sweat glistened on his pale face, and his hair was matted to his head like he had been running around a lot. "What?" Sam asked, getting out of bed. "The Ironborn," the man managed to say finally. "They're attacking the city." Sam ran to the window and looked out, seeing fires in the distance where the harbor was, and he could hear the sounds of fighting. "What do we do?" the acolyte asked, obviously terrified. Sam didn't know how to answer. He came to the Citadel to get away from fighting. "Come on," he said, rushing out of the room. Acolytes and maesters alike were running around in a panic, but Sam pushed through them, heading towards the main doors. Over the noise he heard the clear shout of someone calling for more people to come to the main doors. Sam and the acolyte who had woken him made their way towards the voice and soon found themselves near Archmaester Theobald, the current seneschal of the Citadel. The old man was bellowing at the top of his lungs. "Come on! Grab all you can! Tables, chairs, desks! Get them over here!" The Septon roared, his chain rattling. "Seneschal, what's happening?" Sam asked as he reached the man. "Who are you?" Theobald demanded. "Samwell Tully," Sam answered. "Tyrell Randall's son?" Theobald asked. "Yes." Sam nodded. "Good." The man grunted, jerking his head for Sam to follow. The bloody Ironborn had made it into the city. "What are we going to do?" Sam asked, keeping up with the furious man. "What can we do?" Theobald snapped. "We're fucking defenseless. I'm having everything we can get our hands on brought to the doors to barricade ourselves in." He glanced at the acolyte behind Sam. "You, go and make yourself useful." The acolyte nodded quickly and ran off. Sam watched him go before taking a good look around. Maesters were grabbing books and scrolls by the armful and running off with them. The entire Citadel had to be on its feet. "Is there anything else we can do?" Sam asked. "I am the foremost expert on warfare in the bloody place, but doesn't mean shit if we don't have anyone who can wield a sword." Theobald scoffed. "All masters have orders to move as many books and scrolls into the vaults, and the archmasters are clearing out the forbidden section." Sam and Theobald finally reached the main doors, which were mostly hidden behind a mountain of wooden objects. Desks, tables, chairs, bookshelves were being placed in front of the doors. Half a dozen maester, presumably experts on warfare, were showing where to put what. Behind them, a few acolytes who were larger than the normal man were armed with hammers taken from the forges. "What happened to the city watch?" Sam asked. Theobald shook his head. "They won't be able to hold back the Iron Fleet. Our entire fleet is in the fucking Westerlands, and most of our men are in the west with your father. We're defenseless." The seneschal caught the arm of one maester who was scurrying past. "Tell Barton that he is to start preserving as much food as possible. We'll be here for a while." The maester nodded and ran off. It was almost comical to Sam that every person in the Citadel seemed to run the same way. It was a cross between a shuffle and a full sprint. It was probably of the long robes they all wore, and the fact that they didn't get much exercise other than walking. It would have been funny if there wasn't the terrifying thought that they could all die by the morning. "What would your father do?" Theobald asked suddenly. "My father?" Sam asked. "I don't know. Probably forced whatever could be used as a weapon into our hands and led the charge against the enemy." The bald snorted, crossing his arms. "We're men of knowledge, Tyrell. These men have seen more pictures of swords than actual swords." Sam shrugged slightly. "My father was a man of action. If he was going to die, he was going to die fighting." "He has that reputation," Theobald said grimly. "If we make it through the night and even this damn attack, there will be many changes." "Changes?" Sam asked. "Yes, changes," Theobald snapped in annoyance. "The Citadel will need a set of guards, a group to protect the knowledge we have in this building. It's invaluable to the entirety of Westeros, except for the bloody savages who just got here." "Forgive me, Senecal, but shouldn't you be thinking about other things?" Sam asked, glancing towards the door. "What more can we do, Tyrell?" Theobald scowled. "Besides, I'm an old man. If I die here or next year, it doesn't matter. I'm still going to end up in the ground." "Fair," Sam conceded after a moment. "Line break." Victarion. The Starry Septon was a massive structure of white marble and colored glass. Its massive doors were decorated with carvings of the Seven. Through the windows, Victarion could make out the scared faces of Septons and Septas. The Lord Captain marched up the steps to the church, pressing his hands against one door. The resistance he felt was not of a lockbar, but of many people pressing themselves against the door on the other side. "Come on!" Victarion barked, chopping into the door with his battle axe. His crew quickly caught on to what he was doing, and immediately set to work chopping the door down. As they worked, more and more fearful cries came from the other side, as the door was destroyed. Eventually Victarion threw his shoulder against the door, and felt it give slightly. He repeated the action and the doors flew open. Many white-robed figures scrambling away from the doors. But it was no use. Victarion's raiders were cutting them down by the dozens, their robes offering little resistance to iron axes and swords. One man, fat and dressed in more ornate robes, stood in the center of the room, shaking with fear. "This is," he muttered before swallowing and trying again. "You have no right to be here. This is a godly place. Your gods are here to protect you," Victarion growled, marching towards the fat man. The priest began to back up, and when Victarion faked an attack at him, he tripped over his robes and landed on his ass with a cry. "You're pathetic," Victarion sneered, taking the man's head with a single swing of his axe. Raiders were tearing the church apart, grabbing everything they could get their hands on. Chalices of gold and jewel, silver platters and little jade statues. The reason why Victarion wanted this place for himself was because he knew that the faith of the Seven spared no expense. They took their followers' offerings and spent them on themselves. It was the greatest scandal in human history that no one ever spoke about. The drowned god demanded nothing but blood and devotion from his followers. "Lord Captain," someone called, striding into the septon. He was armed in boiled leather and chainmail, with a blue cloak, with 2 crossing pieces of wood. He held a bloodied sword in one hand and an axe in the other. "To step to septon," Victarion grunted. "What?" "It's the Citadel," the son of Lord Spar said. "The fools have barricaded themselves in. My father is asking for your presence." "What does your father want with the Citadel?" Victarion asked, walking with the younger man outside and heading past the violence towards the 3rd largest building in the city. By now, the city watch had been routed and the city was completely free for the Ironborn to pillage as they pleased. Raiders were taking everything that wasn't nailed down, and that included women. The screams of the terrified were mixed with the exalted bellows of the Ironborn. This would certainly be a night that Westeros would never forget. Line break. "Samwell!" The axe head finally sheared through the door, creating an opening just wide enough for one man to look through. It was an old man, his face lined with age, with a fearsome scowl on his face. "Open the damn door," the man snarled. "Fucking cunts." "Lord Spar," Theobald barked. "Stop this madness. This is a place of learning. You have no idea the damage that will happen if you take this place." "Open the fucking door," Lord Spar repeated. "Never," Theobald responded. The old man grunted and moved away from the door. Even if they got through the door, it would be very difficult for them to get through the dozens of wooden furniture that supported the door. "Fucking Ironborn," Theobald scowled. "No respect." Before the Senator could finish his sentence, an arrow flew through the opening in the door and embedded itself in the old man's side. He dropped to his knees, his hands instantly going to his side. "Seneca!" Sam cried as more ran over. "Get him out of here. He's been hurt." One Meister instantly barked instructions to 2 acolytes, who grabbed the injured Archmeister and carried him off. No one knew what to do after that. Theobald had been the de facto leader of the defenses. "Meisters," a deep, powerful voice came from the opening. Sam shuffled over to the door, doing his best to stay behind some over. "Who are you?" "Victarion Greyjoy," the man answered. "You?" "Samwell Tarley," Sam answered, trying his best not to stutter. "Leave us be." "Open your doors and you will be spared," Victarion grunted. "If we come through, none will leave alive." Some of the acolytes muttered amongst themselves, but Sam shushed them violently, glaring at them. He looked back at the man in the opening. "We know what you did in the north," Sam answered. "We will never open our doors to you." The Ironborn chuckled, with what sounded like amusement. "Brave words for a maester," he said. "You're certainly a Tarly." "You're certainly a Greyjoy," Sam said hesitantly, unsure of how to respond. "We have nothing you want." "I am no fool, boy. You have gold and jewels in there." Thecton responded, no longer sounding amused. "It may take a day or more, but we will break in." You do that and you're dead men, Sam said with a certainty that shocked even him. Robb Stark will beat you. The Stark boy is in the east. Your own father is in the west. You are alone, boy. Victarion grunted. For the respect I have for your father, I will give you till first light, before my men attack. I will be back for an answer then. Line break. Leighton Hightower. The old lord of Oldtown looked out from his balcony as his city burned. He could hear the cries and screams of his people as they were raped and defiled by the raiders. He saw smoke emerge from where the starry septum was, and knew that the church would soon be ablaze. The Ironborn meant to leave their mark on the city, and they would certainly do so. "My lord?" Rhea asked worriedly, walking up behind her husband. The Ironborn had not touched the Hightower, and perhaps for a reason. Whoever commanded the raiders wanted Leighton to watch as his city was sacked and destroyed. A sight that tore at the old man's soul. Bloody raiders. Leighton growled, his liver-marked hands gripping the banister. The city is lost. Rhea nodded, her tear-stained face staring at the city. Who will help us? I don't know, Leighton sighed. The king left Mace at Bitterbridge with 10,000 men. It will take time for him to get here, but there's no chance the raiders will be here when he does. What will we do? His wife asked. There's nothing we can do, Leighton said gravely. At least the Citadel looks unharmed. The Starry Septas is lost. Even the Seven have abandoned us. Rhys said, choking back a sob. Leighton scowled. He was not as strong a believer as his wife, but he did not argue with her. This was a night that would scar and haunt the people of Oldtown for decades to come, and it would be years before the city returned to its former glory. The Seven weren't here this night. Leighton agreed, finally. Only the drowned god. Robb de Grabandre. As soon as the ruins of Harrenhal came into view, a smile spread across Robb's face as he saw the banner of House Stark, the grey direwolf, and a field of snow, flying from the tallest tower, the banner of House Tyrell, flying from the second tallest. That's all he needed to know, that Margaery had already made it, and was waiting for him. I must admit, I thought I would have darker thoughts of this place, Garland said, riding next to Robb. The Northern King nodded. Same here. From the gates rode a small group of warriors. At their head was an older man with a well-groomed beard, wearing a tabard bearing a red castle. Behind him was a tall, broad-shouldered man armored in steel plate and wearing a tabard with a broken wheel on a field of green. Lord Horton Redfort and Sir Morton Waynwood. Lord Royce said quietly to Robb as the two groups approached. Your Grace, the old man said with an easy smile. Harrenhal is yours. Robb bowed slightly to the man. Lord Redfort, it is a pleasure to finally meet you, he nodded to the other man. Sir Morton, same to you. We have 20,000 men ready to march, Lord Horton said. I have had our scouts go as far as Maidenpool. The road is clear. Tywin has probably pulled all his forces into King's Landing, Robb said as his column rode towards the ruins. The Lord of Redfort on his left, with Sir Morton taking a place on Garland's right. The men of the Vale have arrived just in time. We wish we would have arrived sooner, Sir Morton grumbled. Better late than never, Garland replied with a grin. You must be Sir Garland, Lord Horton said, leaning forward and nodding to the second son of Mace Tyrell. Sir Loras and your sister the Queen arrived yesterday. How does my brother look? Garland asked curiously. The last time he had seen Loras, the young knight had been close to death. He's rearing to finish the fight. Lord Horton said kindly. He's already dueled Sarah, Morton and all his brothers. Sounds like Loras. Garland chuckled as the column rode through the gate and into the castle. Lord Royce, if you and Sire Brynden can make sure everyone is settled, I would like to find my wife, Robb said, glancing over his shoulder at the two older men. The Lord of Runstone nodded. Of course, Your Grace. I'll find Loras and meet you both later. Garland added, I will bring you to the Queen, Sire Morton said, as they all dismounted. Thank you, sir, Robb said, following the Vale Knight. Margaery was in the Lord's Solar near the top of the highest tower. She and her grandmother were both inside and wore grim expressions. Sir Loras was inside as well, wearing full armor. He looked a lot better than the last time Robb had seen him. Robb, Margaery said, as soon as Robb entered, rushing to him and throwing her arms around him. My lady, Robb joked with a small smile, returning the hug before lightly kissing Margaery. I told you I would be back. We will give you some time. Lady Olenna said, bowing slightly and dragging Loras from the room, closing the door behind them. I've missed you, Robb whispered, still not letting go of his wife. When Loras returned to Riverrun, I feared the worst. Margaery admitted sadly. I heard from the survivors what you planned to do. It was suicide, she said, slapping him lightly. Robb chuckled slightly. Not my smartest plan, I'll admit, but I couldn't run. I had to face Tywin in the open. Thanks to the Lords of the Vale, we won. You heard what happened to Lady Lysa? Margaery asked, stepping away and pouring them both drinks. Water for herself and watered wine for Robb. I did, Robb responded. After hearing it, I can't say I'm all that saddened by her death. She was family, but she would have become my enemy. Lord Dreadfort spoke highly of the new Lord Arryn, Margaery commented. There was a noticeable swell in her stomach that Robb reminded himself to get to. He seems like a good enough man, Robb agreed. How's the babe? A different kind of smile was now on Margaery's face. It was the kind Robb noticed his mother had when she had watched him spar Sansa so. It was a motherly smile full of love, warmth, and care. The babe is great, Margaery answered. My grandmother sent for the best maester as soon as she found out. He arrived a few weeks ago, and he's been tremendous. Robb took her hand, kneeling next to her chair. That is great to hear. The two kissed once more, before Robb took a seat across from her, quickly drinking the wine. What have you been up to since I've been away?
Margaery shot him an amused look.
You have many territories that need a constant watch. Not to mention war on 4 fronts. 4? Robb asked. He knew that Jon was in the north, and Tyrell in the west technically counted as 1, since the Westerlands were all his territory save for Casterly Rock, and the invasion into the Iron Islands should begin any day now. The final war front was between him and Tywin.
Margaery's amused look immediately disappeared.
There's been word from my father in the Reach. Oldtown has been sacked by the Ironborn. They've gone from the north? Robb asked, confused. So it would seem, Margaery sighed. My father and his host are marching towards the city now. We'll need to get word to Lord Manderly that the Ironborn are not where we thought they were, said. Since they're not in the north, that should make Jon's work easier. More than you know, Margaery said, an excited smile spreading across her face. I received this from Lord Manderly the day before I left for Harrenhal, she explained, sliding a raven message across the desk to Robb. The Northern King raised an eyebrow, but took the scroll and opened it. It said, Your Grace, before I begin, Sir Davos and Lord Velaryon have arrived in the north with their fleet. They await the king's instructions. The Company of the Rose had arrived in the north as well. 4,000 men in total. They are led by Eddard Stark, the king's father. Signed, Lord Wyman Manderly, Lord of White Harbor. Robb's hands were shaking as he put down the message. He looked at his wife, who had tears of joy. My father's alive? Robb asked quietly, still not sure how to react. It was just like when Jon had revealed his true parentage to him. There was a mixture of emotion and Robb wasn't. Which one to pick? One part of him wanted to break down and cry. The other wanted to laugh and cheer wildly. I couldn't believe it myself, Margaery admitted quietly, before pulling out a small stack of parchments. This found its way here, the day I arrived. It's the full report on what happened to your father, and it also contains information about the Company of the Rose that you should know. Robb shook his head. I'll read it tonight. I can't. There will be a war council tonight. Do you think you can give a summary?
Margaery nodded.
Gladly. Robb leaned forward, resting his head in his hands. He stayed like that for a while. He could feel Margaery's eyes on him, losing their excitement. He knew that she meant well. This was amazing news. But there was no way he could have prepared to hear it. He and Jon had mourned together after they had heard the news. They had mentally accepted their father's death. Robb, are you all right? Margaery asked worriedly. Robb nodded. I'm fine. Is there anything else that I need to know about? Margaery shook her head. No, nothing else. Lord Tarly is preparing his attack on the Iron Islands. Jon has passed Moat Cailin and is in the north. As far as I or my grandmother's sources, none of the other northern houses have gone over to the Boltons. We don't know what's happened in King's Landing. Lord Horton's men have only gone as far as Maidenpool. Robb nodded. He told me, I'll send out some men with a couple thousand men to take the Antlers, Duskendale and Rosby. We'll need to secure those castles before we attack King's Landing. Do you expect them to resist? Margaery asked. Robb shook his head. No, Tywin's power is broken. I doubt he can muster more than 12,000 men. He pooled all his manpower together when we first fought. That took a big hit during that battle, and again at High Heart. Margaery nodded. Should we call a war council now? Robb shook his head again as reached out and grabbed Margaery's hand. No, we'll have it tonight. Right now I just want to send out a few messages and spend time with you. Line break. For the rest of the day, Robb spent his time in the Solar with Margaery. They ate lunch and dinner together as Robb wrote messages to Jon, Lord Tarly and his good father. Margaery and her grandmother had done an amazing job managing the rest of the realm, including the merging of the Vale to the rest of the northern territories. All that was left was the war, which Robb was more than capable of handling. Garland had interrupted briefly during their dinner to see his sister, both with massive grins on their faces. By this time Robb had gotten over the shock of his father's reappearance, and had invited his good brother to join them for dinner. But Garland had respectfully declined, stating that he was going to eat with his grandmother and Loras, allowing Robb and Margaery to have their time together before they were all once again thrown into the war. Now Garland knocked on the door, poking his head in. The council is ready. Robb nodded and helped Margaery, escorting her out of the room and through the castle. Garland right behind them. Harrenhal was a massive castle, but the trio eventually found themselves in the meeting room where all of Robb's commanders were assembled. 3 chairs had been left at the head of the table and on its immediate right and left for Garland, Robb and Merry to sit in. After helping his wife into her seat, Robb stood in front of his. My lords, I am sorry for the lateness of this meeting. It has been a while since I have seen my wife. Robb apologized. Once again, I must thank the lords of the Vale for capturing the castle. It was the least we could do, your grace. Lord Redfort replied easily, with a smile that seemed just a bit too happy. Indeed, Robb said, nodding to the man. Now, to business. The Queen has helped me get caught up with all that is happening. Lord Tarly turned over the siege of Casterly Rock to his son, Dickon, while he prepares his men for an invasion of the Iron Islands. The group of lords clapped politely, happy to know that the raiders will soon be dealt with. None of them had suffered as the northern lords had, but they all had a general dislike for the seafaring people. Hearing that the Ironborn would soon be brought to heel was a relief, if nothing else. While the Ironborn will soon be dealt with, I'm afraid that they have hit my lands once again, Robb said, his voice growing grave as he spoke. The Iron Fleet has sacked Oldtown. Lord Tyrell is currently marching towards the city with his host of 10,000 to retake the city, or help rebuild it, if the raiders have moved on. The Shield Islands have also been made aware of the attack, and have assembled as much of their fleet as possible to protect their keeps. Margaery added, her voice matching her husband's. Does this mean that the Ironborn are out of the north? Sarah Brynden asked. Robb nodded. To my understanding, yet, that also leads to my next point. My brother, Jon, has made it past Moat, Callan, and now has 10,000 men to retake the north. How many men do the Boltons have? Garland asked. 9,000. Sarah Morton grunted. 5,000 sieging Eagle's Roost and another 4,000 between Bolton himself and a small host attacking the last hearth. The White Wolf will be hard-pressed to defeat them all, Lord Yon rumbled. It is not impossible, but the cost will be high. Robb shared a glance with his wife before responding to the older lord. Perhaps not, Lord Royce. When I arrived, my wife gave me some miraculous news that I now get to share with you all. What's that, your grace? Sarah Brynden asked, one eyebrow raised. My father, Eddard Stark, is alive, Robb stated. The room somehow grew quieter after Robb dropped the news. The lords looked around at themselves, unsure if they had heard their king right. They all knew Ned Stark was dead. Now he was alive. I understand that this is very confusing to hear, my lords, Margaery said smoothly, stepping in to fill the silence. Not only do we have a message from Lord Wyman, but we have also been delivered a written account of what actually happened. The lords looked towards Robb, who shook his head and gestured to his wife. She will explain. I was just as confused as you all, he admitted, sinking into his chair. Margaery stood up, giving Robb a slight smile before folding her hands in front of her and addressing the group of older, grizzled men. I think it best to explain the Company of the Rose before I get into the hand they play in all this. Marjorie started. As most of you probably know or remember, the Sellsword Company was formed after Tywin Stark bent the knee to Aegon Targaryen. History states that they did this because they did not want to be ruled by the Targaryens. That is all a lie. In secret, the last king in the north formed the company of second and third sons, even cousins, of all the great northern houses. It was to ensure that they, the houses, could live on, should the Targaryens ever attack the north. The company had two missions: to survive and to return when a Stark was king once again. That is what the Company of the Rose did for 300 years. It survived, as did all of the original houses it was comprised of, and bided its time for when a Stark once again wore the crown of winter. Marjorie took a small break to take a drink of water before continuing. The company built up a reputation as a solid company that took on contracts where victory was all but certain. During that time, it also built up a lot of golden agents all across Essos and Westeros. Marjorie explained. It was the agents of the company that broke into the Black Cells and rescued Lord Stark, found his daughter Arya, and reclaimed the ancestral sword of House Stark, ice before sending all three to Davos, where the headquarters of the company is located. Robb's head snapped up when he heard that Arya had been captured, but all Marjorie gave him was a glance. The look told him that now was not the time to bring up the fact that she had forgotten to mention his sister. Robb leaned back in his chair and waited for Marjorie to proceed, reminding himself that he would have known that information had he read the full report. Upon reaching Bravos, Lord Stark and his daughter were protected and hidden from the world by the company. Now they have returned to the north to help Jon free the north. Marjorie finished. The table was silent for a second as the others took in the information. It was easy to understand, thanks to the way the Queen had laid it all out, but at the same time it was still hard to comprehend. Who led the company while it was in Essos? Sarah Brynden asked finally. A man by the name of Darren Stark, Marjorie answered. He is related to Torrhen Stark's youngest son, if I am not mistaken. And Ned is truly with them? Lord Royce asked. Wyman wouldn't lie. Lord Forrester answered quietly. If he said that Ned was with them, then he was. Lord Stark is truly alive. Lord Bolton must be shitting himself. Lord Blackwood chuckled darkly. We all were there. Ned was the most dangerous of Hoster, Robert and Jon. The company has 4,000 men to add to my brother's force, Robb said. Jon now has more than enough men to take back the north. All that leaves is King's Landing. Harold Arryn said. Indeed, Robb said. We leave in 2 days. Lords Royce, Forrester and Blackwood shall march out with 2,000 men each, and take the castles of Rook's Rest, Duskendale, and Antlers. Lord Royce, Antlers, Blackwood will take Rook's Rest, and Lord Forrester Duskendale. Not Rosby, Your Grace? Garland asked. Robb shook his head. It's too close to the city for my liking. We'll take it when our host makes it there. The king turned his attention back to the council. That will be all. Line break. Robb, Smalljon, and Dacey strode out of the castle and down towards the banks of the God's Eye. The two northern nobles kept a respectful distance as Robb led the way, Grey Wind lopping easily at his side. The only person happier to see Marjorie than Robb had been the giant wolf. The night air was cool and crisp, and the moon and stars above shone on the waters of the lake, turning them black and silver. The Isle of Faces was a dark haze in the distance. Robb promised himself that he would travel there one day before he died, and see where the pact between men and the children of the forest was signed. Smalljon, Dacey, do you mind staying here? Robb asked kindly. They were about 20 yards from the edge of the lake. The two warriors nodded and stayed where they were as Robb strode down to the water, kneeling at the edge and bowing his head. Uncle Brandon, Aunt Lyanna, thank you, Robb whispered under his breath, staring at the Isle of Faces in the distance. He knew that Smalljon and Dacey wouldn't have been able to hear him if they were closer, but Robb didn't want them to somehow overhear what he was saying. It would be hard to explain. You did well, nephew. Brandon's voice whispered in Robb's head. The fight is not over yet. Robb, Lyanna's voice said this time. Make sure you know when to end it. Robb frowned, but nodded slightly as he stood up. I will, he promised. Roost III. The Leech Lord worked slowly through the reports that cluttered his black desk. He had placed his faith in the old lion and his ability to kill Stark, but for once, Tywin Lannister had been unable to live up to his reputation. It was close when Roose heard that Tywin had beaten Robb at Harrenhal, but when the Knights of the Vale had surprised the Lannister forces at Highheart, Roose knew that he could no longer rely on Tywin. He had rolled the dice in a play for power, and now Roose was alone with barely enough men to protect himself. He had 2,000 men with him at the Dreadfort. Arnulf Stark and his son had another 2,000 at the Last Hearth. The bulk of Roose's forces were at Eagle's Roost under Roderick Riswell's command. 5,000 Riswell, Dustin, and Frey men. Riswell's force was taking a beating during their siege of the town, and while Roose hoped that they would be able to burn the town, he doubted they would be able to. The other northern lords finally made it past Moats Cailin, and it was not hard to know where Roland Hawker was going first. "My lord," Walton said, knocking on the door. "Come," Roose answered, not looking up from his work. "What?" "More reports from the scouts," the captain said, standing at attention after closing the door behind him. "The northern army under Snow has marched west towards Barrowton and the Rills." Roose glanced up at the long-legged soldier. "The entire army?" "All 10,000 men," Walton confirmed. Roose leaned back in his chair, thinking quickly. Obviously the boy was in no rush to free the north, or else he would have split his force and attacked both Riswell and Roose. If he was going west, then he would easily be able to take both Barrowton and the Rills before moving on Eagle's Roost, where he would destroy Lord Riswell's host. Then he would be free to move on to Roose without having to watch his back. "Send word to Arnulf," Roose ordered. "Tell him to return here with his men." Walton bowed slightly. "We have also investigated the strange disappearance of the Ironborn. They attacked my castle a few nights ago." Roose scowled. "They're not gone. The scouts have found Torrens Square completely abandoned, and Riswell sends word that there are no more raids along the stony shore." Walton answered, "We believe that the raiders came from Deepwood Motte, where the Ironborn still remain." Roose nodded slightly. If this was the case, then that would give Roose more time to prepare his defenses. It would also serve to bloody the bastard's forces before moving on to the Dreadfort. "What else have the scouts reported?" Roose asked. "The company of the Rose has arrived in the north," Walton answered immediately. 4,000 sellswords, Roose cursed internally. If the Starks had bought them, then he was well and truly fucked. "Ride out to meet with them immediately." Roose snapped. "Offer them whatever it takes to bring them to our side." "Will that work?" Walton asked. Roose glared at his captain. "They're sellswords. Money is all they care about. Now go, and tell Ramsay I need him." The captain bowed and left, leaving Roose alone to dwell on his position. He had been a prominent commander in the Northern Army, and he and his men had filled their pockets with the wealth of the Westerlands. Then, when the Ironborn attacked, the Blackfish had honored him with the mission of saving the North. Roose could have made himself a war hero and a savior of the North. Instead, he had thrown all that away in a roll of the dice. He had thought that, with the Lannisters supported by the Dornish and the Vale, Robb Stark wouldn't stand a chance, and the Lords of the North would submit themselves to Roose's rule. It was a power play that Roose's ancestors have never had a chance to take. It was a chance to take their rightful place as the true Lord Paramounts of the North. Now it was all crumbling around the Leech Lord. Tywin had been defeated and sent scurrying south, his power all but broken. The Dornish seemed to have abandoned him. The Vale is declared for the Stark boy. All Roose was left with was a fortune of gold and 9,000 men to defend his claim against 10,000 angry Northmen. Buying the company of the Rose was one last dice roll for Roose. If he could get them, make a small host of 8,000 men, it might be enough to defeat the Bastards' army after they had battled the Riswells and the Ironborn. "Father," Ramsay asked, striding in. Reek, his servant, stood in the doorway. "You will take 100 men and ride out," Roose said immediately, not wasting time. "From Umberlands to the Hornwoods and Manderlys. Burn every farm. Take every scrap of food." Ramsay smiled happily. "With pleasure, father." Line break. Barbary Dustin, the Lady of Barrowton, could do little but watch as the army marched on her home. It flew the banners of northern houses, the raging giant of Umber, the sunburst of Karstark, the Mormont Bear. Flying at the head of the army was the banner that once made her heart burst with joy, but now made her blood boil. It was the grey direwolf of House Stark. "Should we prepare the defenses, my lady?" the captain of the guard asked. Barbara shook her head. "There's no point," she said bitterly. "Bring the leader of the army to the Great Hall." The widow of Willem Dustin was no fool. Most of her men were in the Stony Shore, with her father. She had barely 200 men guarding the town, against the army at her gates. It would be stupid to even try to resist. No, she would keep her head high as she handed over her town. Barbara made her way back into her hall and took a seat on her throne, waiting patiently while her enemies were brought to her. She would not apologize for what she did, for being a traitor. She owed nothing to House Stark, as far as she was concerned. Ned Stark failed to bring back the bones of her husband. She owed the Starks nothing. For what seemed like an eternity, she waited. Then she heard them. The sound of marching boots on the feet of men who moved with purpose. There was also the slight jingle of armor. Then the doors were slammed open. She recognized most of the group. The Grayson, Rickard Karstark, Maggie Mormont, Galbar Clover, Roland Harker, and even Howland Reed. They all looked a little older than the last time she saw them, but none looked happy to see her. Maggie and Karstark even had hands on their weapons. The one she didn't recognize was the young man in black armor leading the group. He was of average height, lean and muscular. He looked like a typical Stark, with a long face, dark hair, and gray, dour eyes. At his side was a massive albino wolf. "Lady Dustin," the young man said, his voice like iron. "You have submitted your town to my men." Barbara nodded stiffly. "I do. Whom do I speak to?" "I am Jon Snow, brother to His Grace King Robb Stark, the king in the north," Jon answered. "Traitor," Mormont growled. "I am no such thing," Barbara answered simply, glaring at the she-bear. "I never pledged loyalty to Robb Stark, and my loyalty to House Stark died long ago. Your husband pledged his loyalty to Eddard Stark when we marched south during the rebellion." The Grayson rumbled. "I knelt next to the man. All my loyalty to House Stark died the moment Eddard Stark left my husband's bones in the south." The Lady of Barrowton snapped before she could stop herself, losing her composure for just a moment. "Well, I'm asked to be buried there." Howland Reed said quietly. "I was there, woman. I saw the man fall." His final words were to be buried in the field he fell in. "I dug his grave myself. He didn't want you to be told because you wouldn't understand." Barbara glared at the Cranogman, who gazed back at her with an emotionless look. He continued. "Ethan Glover, Martin Castle, Theo Wool, and Mark Reeswell also died in the fight against Gerald Hightower, Oswell Wend, and Arthur Dane." Howland said. "The Glovers answered Robb Stark's call for aid. The Castles served House Stark with unwavering loyalty. The Wools still have nothing but love for the Starks. You and only you have grown petty and bitter." Jon and the other Northmen looked surprised with Howland's outburst, as was Barbara herself. She knew little about the Lord of Greywater Watch, but she knew enough to know that he was not a man who spoke much. He was a man of action. "Willem would be ashamed of how you have acted." Howland finished, his words making Barbara flinch. Jon looked between Barbara and Howland before speaking. "Lady Dustin, your husband's house has been loyal to House Stark for years. You do not get to say that you are no longer under their rule, all because you are bitter," Jon said. "You are a traitor, whether you wish to acknowledge yourself as one or not. I have no power to strip you of lands or titles. That belongs to my brother alone. Instead, you shall remain here, a prisoner in your own home, and a Castellan shall be instituted until King Robb passes his judgment." "Kill me and be done with it," Barbara snarled. Jon shook his head. His calm, firm attitude reminded Barbara of Eddard Stark, and she was having problems controlling her emotions. It didn't help that the young man before her looked like every Stark she had ever known, including Brandon. "You committed treason, my lady, but I am not the one who can sentence you to death," Jon answered, motioning for Stark guards to come forward. "From this point on, you are to be confined to your chambers." Barbara accepted the decision with her head held high, striding out of the room on her own feet instead of being dragged out. She was the Lady of Barrowton, at least for the moment. She would act like it, all the way to the end. Line break. Asha and the remainder of her men straggled back into Deepwood, Mata. She had 10 men with her, a tenth of the 100 men she had marched off with. The men manning the battlements looked down at her, their gazes filling her with shame. She had left so confidently, and now she returned without most of her men or her brother. Her nuncle was waiting in the main square. "Need I ask?" Roderick asked as soon as Asha dismounted. "No," Asha answered quietly. walking past her uncle and into the keep, the older man following her. "What happened?" Roderick asked as soon as they were alone. "We made it into the castle, and I left the majority of my men at the base of the wall we scaled," Asha explained angrily, slamming both of her axes into a nearby table. "With a dozen of my crew we searched the castle and found Theon." "How did he look?" Roderick asked, crossing his arms. "The fuckers tortured him," Asha growled. "His toes and fingers were nearly all gone. They even took his fucking cock." "Were there cuts in his skin?" Roderick asked. Asha nodded. The reader cursed. "You're lucky you got there when you did. I read a little on flaying, but whoever was working on him was getting ready to do so. Go on." "We grabbed him and made it back to the wall. We came over and found all my men dead. There was some bloody lunatic and a dozen of his men there." Asha shook her head. "They knew we were coming and Theon was the bait for their trap." "You made it out alive," Roderick observed, "and fucked up my shoulder in the process." Asha snarled. "I had to jump over the wall and grabbed onto one of the ropes to stop myself from hitting the ground like a sack of rocks. It all went to shit within seconds and I didn't even get Ian out. Perhaps it was for the best." Roderick sighed. "You traveled across nearly the entire north to get to the Dreadfort. In Ian's condition, do you think he could have made it back?" Asha glared at her uncle, but knew he was right. That's why she tended to value his advice over her uncle's, and even her father's sometimes. He was a realist who didn't put his entire faith in the drowned god. He was insulted by other Ironborn for reading books, but he was undoubtedly the smartest man in the islands. "Vinson's as good as dead now," Asha said finally. "We have no choice but to sail home." "I'm afraid that's no longer an option," Roderick said grimly. "Our ships were burned while you were away." "Burned?" Asha cried. "How?" "A few brave souls from Bear Island came over and burned all of our ships. Because Thepton didn't attack the keep, about 40 Mormont soldiers came across, killed our guards, and burned the ships. So we're stuck here," Asha summarized. Her uncle nodded. "We're stuck here." Asha grabbed one of her axes and threw it against the wall. Bloody perfect. Eddard III. His former home was a burnt shell of itself. The gray curtain walls were stained black, same with most of the keeps and towers. Any building not made of stone. The stables, the kennels were nothing but ash or charred remains. Eddard walked slowly through it all, remembering everyone who served him. Holin, Vayenpool, Mikken, Sarah Roderick, and so many others. Arya was right at his side, her little hand in his. "It's all gone," she whispered, trying hard not to cry. Eddard felt like crying himself. Winterfell was his home, even more so than the Eyrie. He had raised his family here, his siblings, and he had been raised here. Winterfell was, in almost every sense, the heart of the North. Now it was a ruin, one created by the bastard of Bolton. "It will be rebuilt," Ned promised, holding Arya's hand a little tighter, "and those who died will be avenged." "When?" Arya asked. "When the time is right," Ned responded, as the two came to a stop outside the gates to the Godswood. The walls around the small woods had kept the fire from ravaging the forest. The two Starks easily found the heart tree, where Ned cleaned ice after every execution. The small pool beside it was littered with a few red leaves. It was the only place that still felt whole to Ned. "I wish you had never become Hand to the King," Arya said softly. Ned could have laughed. His decision to accept the position of Hand was, in his opinion, what started all this madness. He listened to duty, to honor, and it got all of his men killed. His daughter taken captive, and nearly got himself killed as well. He had made mistake after stupid mistake in King's Landing, and now Robb and so many others were fighting to clean up his mess. Ned nodded. I wish the same. It was a stupid decision on my part, and I didn't make any more smart choices after that." "You hired Syrio," Arya said. Ned smiled slightly. "One small good does not make up for all the bad. I did. I could have saved a lot of lives and kept both you and Sansa safe if I had made better decisions." "You did what you thought was right," Arya argued. "What is right here, in the north, will and did get people killed in the south," Ned replied. "Thank you, child, but there is no changing my mind on this. Your mother, your sister, are both captives because of my choices. The realm is burning because of me. The saying holds true. Starks don't prosper in the south." Ned was once again reminded of his siblings. Brandon, Lyanna, and his father had all died in the south. his father and brother at King's Landing and Lyanna at that blasted tower. It seemed like every time a Stark went south, war always seemed to follow. Robb is, Arya pointed out. He's beating the Lannisters. That's war, child, Ned answered. Robb seems to have a mind for strategy, and he's been a surprise to the enemies of our house, but that's not politics. Do you think Robb will stay in the south once he wins the war? Arya asked curiously. Ned glanced down at his daughter. He had been wondering the same thing himself. With Stannis dead, same with Renly, and the Lannisters certainly couldn't stay in power. All that left was Robb. He was the only one who could provide a stable king. It also helped that he was backed by the second wealthiest and more powerful region, and related by family to the Riverlands and the North. His name alone gave him respect, especially in the Vale and in the Stormlands. The only problem was that Ned didn't want to see his son be corrupted by the Iron Throne. He had seen his best friend and brother, in all but blood, turn into a fat, lazy, depressed man who mourned every day about Ned's sister. Mad men who were obsessed with fire and dragons ruled from that throne. The last thing Ned wanted to see was his eldest son be corrupted by the damn thing. I'm not sure, Ned answered honestly. The two stood silently by the pool of water. Ned knew that Arya was finding the courage to say something, or else she wouldn't be so silent. The aging lord was bracing himself for whatever came out of her mouth. How are we going to get Mother and Sansa back? Arya asked finally. Ned sighed. It won't be easy. Roose knows he can't win, and that will put your mother in a dangerous position. Sansa is in slightly smarter hands with Tywin. He won't harm her. He knows that if he does, he's a dead man. Will Robb be able to get her back? Ned shook his head slightly. I don't know. I hope so. Cousin, Darren Stark said, coming up behind the pair. We have a guest. Where is he? Ned asked, turning around. Back at camp, Darren answered. You might want to change. You still look like Ned Stark, not Lord Stark. Ned glanced at Arya before nodding. No time to waste then. As the three walked back towards their horses, Darren continued to look around the ruins. It was probably the first time a Stark from his family had stepped foot in their ancestral home since Rickard Stark, the youngest son of the last king in the north, had left to form the Company of the Rose. I am sorry it is such a ruin, Ned apologized. It's not the homecoming you deserve. This isn't the welcome any of you deserve, after so long away. Darren shrugged. We're back in the north, cousin. That is enough for us. Most didn't think we would ever see the day. Besides, we're sellswords. Fighting on foreign land is what we're good at. Ned smiled grimly. Roose Bolton will pay for this. Their blades are sharp, but winter is coming, Darren responded fiercely. Line break. Ned, armored in leather and steel, ice strapped to his back, marched into the tent flanked by his cousin. It felt good to finally be able to wear armor and have a weapon by his side. Tomas Greenwood had been attending him nearly every day, and he was finally able to begin sparring again. He had years to slough away before he would finally be in fighting trim. Inside the tent, the other captains of the company sat around a long table, all dressed for war with weapons at their sides. At one end of the table were two men, both armored but unarmed. Their tabards bore the flayed man of House Bolton. Ned recognized the first man. He was one of Roose Bolton's top captains. He had heard him be referred to as Steel Shanks, probably because of the steel greaves he wore on his legs. The man turned around and came face to face with Ned, and he could instantly see it on the man's face. There was surprise, and also terror. It was like he had seen a dead man, which of course he practically was. Stark, he gasped. Lord Stark, Ned corrected. You're Bolton's man. Steel Shanks, if I am correct. You're supposed to be dead. The second man grunted, also shocked. Joffrey cut your head off. I'm not, Ned responded crisply, crossing his arms. Why are you here? Lord Bolton. Steel Shanks started, glancing around the table and noticing for the first time that no one seemed particularly welcoming. Sent us to hire the Company of the Rose.
They're not for sale.
Ned barked, leaning forward and placing both hands on the table. His gray eyes were like steel. Go back to the Leech Lord. Tell him that Eddard Stark is back in the north. Tell him that there is nowhere in the world that he can go, that I won't find him. Steel Shanks glanced at his friend, who was staring at Ned with quite a lot of fear. More often than not, Ned put on a cold facade that hid his warm, kind soul from all except those he loved. When he had been with Arya in the Godswood, he had been Ned Stark. husband to Catelyn Stark, father to Robb, Sansa, Bran, Arya, and Rickon Stark, as well as Jon Snow. In front of the two Bolton soldiers, he was Lord Stark, Lord of the North, the man who fought and defeated Sir Arthur Dayne. He was also the last man alive who had toppled the Targaryen dynasty. "Leave," Ned snapped. The two men couldn't obey the order fast enough. That was entertaining. Darren chuckled, taking his place at the other end of the table. "I wonder if Roose knows that Tywin has been defeated." "Most likely," Ned answered, taking his own seat. "Roose isn't stupid. He knows that he is alone. That's why he sent men here, to try and buy the company. When he learns that I'm alive, he'll do two things: hold my wife hostage as long as possible, and find a way to use my honor against me. If he's left without those two options, he'll try to cause as many deaths as possible, make the cost of victory as bad as defeat." Speaking of Lady Catelyn, "Alec, what do we know?" Darren asked. "My friends would have made it into the castle if not the Ironborn." The company's spy master grunted. Asha Greyjoy attempted to save her brother and failed. Now the castle is guarded carefully night and day. The slight man looked at Ned. "I am sorry, my lord." Ned and Alec Reed had been looking for any way to get agents into the Dreadfort to rescue Cat. Ned knew that Roose was now a man without morals and essential a dead man walking. He couldn't allow Cat to be another casualty in the war. "Why was the daughter of Balon there?" Ned asked. "For Finson Greyjoy was the reason why Winterfell was taken in the first place," Alec explained. "It was then burned by Ramsay Snow, Rose's bastard. Somehow the bastard got his hands on both Ramsay and Lady Catelyn. That's why Asha was there." "Was she able to make it out with Theon?" Darren asked. Alec shook his head. "No. Bolton's bastard snuffed out her plans and set a trap using Theon as bait. She made it into the castle, but when she re-emerged with her brother, she found all of her men dead and Bolton's soldiers waiting for her. She was the only one to escape the Dreadfort that night." "Where is she now?" Darren asked. "Deepwood Mada," Alec answered. "Most of the Ironborn is gone from the north. She and her men are the only ones that remain." "What of King's Landing and Lady Sansa?" Darren asked quickly before the topic switched. "Our agents have been strangely quiet," Alec answered. "As of right now, we don't have eyes or ears in the capital. Lady Sansa's life is in King Robb's hands." Ned repressed a curse. His other plan had been to somehow get Sansa out of King's Landing and get her somewhere safe. Highgarden or Storm's End. Robb's army was a long way through bandit-infested territory from King's Landing. Storm's End and Highgarden would have been much better, but now that was no longer an option. Ned shook his head, clearing his thoughts. He feared for his wife and daughter, but there was nothing he could do for them now. All he could to save his wife was to win this damn northern war. "Enemies to the east and west," Ned said finally, tapping the table thoughtfully. "Jon has control of the northern army, doesn't he?" "Yes, my lord," Duan Umber replied. "Where's he gone?" Ned asked. "West, my lord," Alec answered. "Sir Marlon Manderly and his reinforcements are marching towards them now." "Then the company shall go west as well," Ned said. "I taught both Jon and Robb strategy. If Jon doesn't know why the company of the Rose has landed in Westeros, he is assuming that they are his enemy. That makes Rose stronger in the west. That means Jon is marching east to take the Rills and Barrowton before marching on Roderick Ryswell at Eagle's Roost. If the company meets up with him, it can be of some use, snuffing out the rest of the Ironborn or Bolton men still in the east." "Why not attack Bolton now?" one of the captains asked. "Because there's every chance that Rose could slip out or have a force nearby that could attack the company from behind." Ned answered, "If Jon is heading west with his entire host, then he does not mean to leave any enemies behind him. The addition of the company can make the process go a lot faster." "You sound like you're not coming," Darren commented. "I will meet up with you all later. I mean to get more help. Roose Bolton wanted the entirety of the North to bow to him. I mean to show him the fury of the entire North." Ned answered. "Where will you go?" someone asked. "The mountain clans," Ned replied simply. "Hugo Wall is an old friend. It will take time to rally the clansmen, but I should have them all by the time the company and Jon march east towards the Boltons. There are also reports that the last hearth is under siege," Alec Reed pointed out. "It won't be for long," Ned said, waving aside the man's report. Once Roose realizes that we are not on his side, he will draw all his men in on himself and dig in. We need to send a rider back to him and tell him to watch out for any raider. Davos and Lord Velaryon's marines might be able to help in a pinch. Daeron nodded. Very well. A rider shall be sent to White Harbor. Lord Stark shall ride for the mountain clans, and the company shall march west to meet with the White Wolf. If we move quickly, we should be able to merge with him before he reached Eagle's Roost. If all goes to plan, we should have the north free from traitors and raiders within a few months, Ned answered. Then we shall see what my other son has been up to in the south.